Hello everyone, welcome to Midnight Story Channel. I'm here to help you today. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and allow yourself to relax. Your story is about to begin. Story 1. The moment we stumbled upon that cave, filled to the brim with crates and scattered goods. I knew our casual hiking trip had taken a sharp, dangerous turn. What I didn't realize was how swiftly we'd find ourselves sprinting for our lives through the very wilderness we'd come to enjoy. It was supposed to be a straightforward day hike, just me and my best friend, Alex. We were simply taking advantage of the perfect spring weather to explore a new trail we'd heard whispers about. After being cooped up all winter, the promise of fresh air and breathtaking views was simply too tempting to resist. The morning started off perfectly. We arrived at the trailhead early, the air crisp and filled with the invigorating scent of pine. Alex was in high spirits, cracking jokes as we shouldered our day packs and set off down the winding trail. The path snaked through dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal stunning vistas of the surrounding mountains. We'd been hiking for about 3 hours when we decided it was time to take a well-deserved break for lunch. As we sat on a fallen log, happily munching on our sandwiches, Alex spotted something interesting. "Hey, check that out," he said, pointing to a narrow opening in the rock face nearby. "Looks like it might be a cave." I squinted at the dark gap. "Could be. Want to check it out?" Alex grinned, always up for a bit of adventure. "Why not? Might be cool inside." We carefully packed up our lunch things and made our way over to the cave entrance. It was larger than it had initially appeared from a distance, easily spacious enough for us to walk through without stooping. Alex pulled out his headlamp, and I switched on my trusty flashlight as we ventured into the cool, damp darkness inside. At first, it seemed like a typical small cave, cool, damp, with the occasional drip of water echoing softly off the walls. But as we moved deeper, the space abruptly opened up into a much larger cavern. And that's when we saw it. Stacked against one wall were numerous crates and boxes, some neatly sealed, others partially open. Scattered around them were various items, electronics, glittering jewelry, even what looked suspiciously like valuable antiques. It didn't take a genius to realize we'd stumbled upon some kind of stash, and a very large one at that. "Holy," Alex whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the scene. Are these all stolen?" I nodded slowly, a knot of cold fear forming in my stomach. "Has to be. This is way too much stuff to just be abandoned here." We stood there for a moment, the heavy gravity of our discovery sinking in. Then, Alex started to move instinctively towards one of the open crates. "What are you doing?" I hissed, grabbing his arm tightly. He shook me off gently. "Just want to see what's in here. Maybe we can figure out where this stuff came from." I knew it was a bad idea, a truly terrible idea, but morbid curiosity, unfortunately, got the better of me too. We began carefully examining the contents of the crates, finding everything from high-end laptops to rare, antique coins. It was like we'd unwittingly stumbled into some kind of clandestine criminal warehouse. We were so utterly engrossed in our perilous exploration that we almost missed the faint sound of voices echoing from the cave entrance. Almost, Alex and I froze, looking at each other in a sudden, shared panic. The voices were undeniably getting closer, and they most certainly didn't sound friendly. "I'm telling you, I heard something down here," a gruff voice said, clear as day. "Probably just some animal, but we better check it out." My heart was pounding so furiously I was sure they'd hear it. There was only one way in or out of this cavern, and the owners of those voices were now blocking it. We were trapped. Alex pointed frantically to a pile of empty crates in one corner. Without a word, we hurried over and squeezed behind them, trying desperately to make ourselves as small and inconspicuous as possible. I quickly switched off my flashlight, and Alex did the same with his headlamp, plunging us into absolute darkness just in the nick of time. Two men entered the cavern, their powerful flashlights sweeping methodically across the vast space. From our cramped hiding spot, I could see them clearly, though I desperately wished I couldn't. They were rough-looking characters, the kind you'd instinctively cross the street to avoid if you saw them coming. And they were armed. "See," one of them said, his voice flat. "Nothing here but our stuff." The other man grunted, moving further into the cavern. "Maybe, but something don't feel right. Let's do a thorough check, just to be sure." I held my breath, every muscle tense, as they began methodically searching the cavern. They were incredibly thorough, checking meticulously behind stacks of crates and peering into every dark, shadowed corner. It was only a matter of agonizing time before they found us. Beside me, I could feel Alex tensing up, his body rigid. I knew exactly what he was thinking. If we were going to make a run for it, now might be our only desperate chance. I gave his arm a quick, warning squeeze, hoping he'd understand my silent message. Wait, not yet. The men were getting chillingly closer to our hiding spot. I could hear the scuff of their heavy boots on the cave floor, see the beams of their flashlights getting brighter, almost brushing our faces. My heart was racing, a frantic drumbeat, and I had to fight the overwhelming urge to close my eyes, as if that would somehow render us invisible. Just when I thought we were utterly doomed, a loud, jarring noise echoed through the cavern, the sound of something heavy toppling over near the entrance. Both men whirled around instantly, their lights focusing sharply on the source of the noise. "What the hell was that?" one of them growled, his voice laced with alarm. "Don't know. Could be the others coming back early, or could be trouble. Let's check it out." They moved quickly towards the cave entrance, their attention momentarily, miraculously diverted. It was now or never. I tugged forcefully on Alex's arm, and we burst from our hiding place. A sudden, explosive movement. The sheer unexpectedness of our appearance caught the men completely off guard, and for a crucial second, they just stood there, stunned into immobility. We ran for the entrance, pushing past them before they could even react. I heard a furious shout behind us, then the terrifying, unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. We didn't stop to look back, just ran full tilt into the dense forest. The calm, inviting trail we'd enjoyed earlier now felt like a brutal gauntlet of unforgiving obstacles. Roots threatened to trip us. Low-hanging branches whipped painfully at our faces, but sheer fear lent us an almost supernatural speed, and we crashed relentlessly through the underbrush, putting desperately needed distance between ourselves and our enraged pursuers. I could hear them behind us, their angry shouts echoing menacingly through the trees. They knew these woods far better than we did, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that they were rapidly gaining on us. "We need to split up," Alex gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts as we ran. "Make it harder for them to follow." I wanted to argue, to scream that we stood a better chance together, but deep down, I knew he was terrifyingly right. With a quick, desperate nod, I veered sharply left while he peeled off to the right. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning with searing agony, my legs aching with a profound, punishing fatigue. Every snapping twig made me flinch violently, every shifting shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away from that terrifying cave as humanly possible. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I found myself teetering precariously at the edge of a steep ravine. The powerful sound of rushing water came from far below. I was trapped. The menacing voices behind me were getting chillingly closer. I looked around frantically, desperately searching for any way out. That's when I spotted it, a narrow ledge barely visible, leading precariously down the side of the ravine. It looked treacherous, barely wide enough to put one foot in front of the other, but it was my only option. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I began to painstakingly edge my way down the sheer rock face. The rock was slick with treacherous moss, and more than once I nearly lost my footing. But sheer desperation kept me going. Inch by perilous inch, I was about halfway down when I heard them reach the top of the ravine. I pressed myself flat against the rock face, hardly daring to breathe. "Where'd he go?" one of them shouted, his voice echoing off the ravine walls. "Must have found a way down. No way he jumped." I stayed perfectly still, praying desperately they wouldn't spot me on my precarious perch. For agonizing minutes, I listened to them searching the area above. Then, mercifully, their voices began to fade as they moved off, presumably to search elsewhere. It took me another nerve-wracking hour to make it to the bottom of the ravine, but by then, my arms and legs were shaking uncontrollably from exertion and lingering adrenaline. But I couldn't rest yet. I needed to find help, and I needed to find Alex. I followed the river at the bottom of the ravine, desperately hoping it would lead me to civilization. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I finally heard something that made my heart soar with desperate hope, the distant, unmistakable sound of traffic. Summoning the very last of my strength, I clambered up the riverbank and pushed through a final, dense stretch of woods. And there it was, a highway stretching out endlessly before me. I'd never been so profoundly happy to see asphalt in my entire life. I flagged down the very first car I saw, probably looking like a wild, raving madman with my torn clothes and wild, terrified eyes. The startled driver, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, listened to my breathless, frantic explanation and immediately called the police. What followed was a whirlwind of police statements, intense search parties, and agonizing, anxious waiting. It wasn't until the next morning that we got the blessed news. They'd found Alex. He was dehydrated and scratched up, but miraculously alive. He'd managed to find a ranger station and bravely raised the alarm. The authorities took our discovery of the cave very seriously. They organized a full-scale raid, catching several members of what turned out to be a major theft ring. The cave, they explained, was just one of several stashes they'd meticulously hidden throughout the state park. In the days and weeks that followed, as Alex and I struggled to process the incomprehensible events that had transpired, we found ourselves dealing with a complex mix of emotions. Profound relief at having survived, certainly, but also a lingering, chilling fear, a newfound awareness of the deep dangers that can lurk even in the most beautiful, seemingly tranquil places. It took time, but eventually, we both found our way back to the trails. Our very first hike after the incident was tense, every snapping twig making us jump violently. But as we walked, feeling the warm sun on our faces and the solid earth beneath our feet, we remembered why we loved this so much in the first place. The wilderness had shown us its darker, more menacing side, yes, but it had also, paradoxically, shown us our own incredible strength, our innate resilience. We'd faced real, terrifying danger and come out the other side, and in doing so, we'd gained a deeper, more profound appreciation for the wild places of the world, their breathtaking beauty, their formidable challenges, and the incredible, transformative effect they can have on the human spirit. Now, when I stand at a trailhead, I feel a complex mix of exhilaration and profound respect. The forest is no longer just a playground, it's a place of deep mystery and potential danger. And yet, I'm drawn to it more than ever before, because I know that out there, among the whispering trees and towering mountains, I'll find not just adventure, but a truer, more authentic version of myself. Story 2. The moment the old couple's eyes glinted with an unsettling malice over the dinner table, I knew my quaint research trip had veered into a nightmare. What I didn't realize was how swiftly I'd be fighting desperately for my escape from the very people who had so warmly welcomed me into their home. I had journeyed to the small, seemingly idyllic town nestled deep in the mountains of Appalachia for my anthropology thesis, intending to study the evolution of isolated rural communities in the digital age. It was supposed to be a straightforward field study, conducting interviews, making observations, and immersing myself in the local culture. The town itself seemed perfect, picturesque, isolated, and seemingly untouched by the relentless march of time. My first week had proceeded smoothly. The locals were friendly, if a bit reserved, and I'd already gathered some truly fascinating data. But it was Mr. and Mrs. Albright who truly captured my academic attention. They were the town's oldest residents, a couple in their late 80s who had lived their entire lives within these ancient hills. When they extended an invitation for dinner, I eagerly jumped at the chance. It was, I thought, an anthropologist's dream, a direct, living link to the town's storied past. Their house was precisely what one would expect from an elderly couple in a small, forgotten town. Doilies meticulously placed on every surface, faded family photographs lining the walls like silent sentinels, and the faint, nostalgic scent of mothballs lingering in the air. Mrs. Albright, a woman whose wrinkles spoke of a long life, fussed over me as soon as I arrived, insisting I shed my coat and make myself utterly comfortable. "It's not often we get visitors," she chirped, her face creasing into a warm smile, "especially not young folks like yourself." Mr. Albright, a man of few words, merely nodded from his worn armchair, a pipe clenched between his teeth. "Town's not what it used to be," he grumbled, his voice gravelly. "Young people all moving away. No respect for tradition." I settled in, notebook poised, eager to absorb every word. This, I thought, was precisely the kind of invaluable perspective I was seeking. As Mrs. Albright busied herself in the kitchen, the comforting clatter of pots and pans, I engaged Mr. Albright in conversation about the town's rich history. He was more than happy to oblige, spinning intricate tales of the town's founding, the harsh struggles they'd faced through generations, and how everything had irrevocably changed over the years. I became so utterly engrossed in his captivating stories that I barely registered the passage of time. It wasn't until Mrs. Albright called us to dinner that I finally realized how late it had grown. The sun had long since set, and a thick, soupy fog had rolled in, obscuring the view from the windows, wrapping the house in an isolating shroud. "You'll stay for dinner, of course?" Mrs. Albright said, her voice a statement, not a question. I hesitated, not wanting to impose, but they insisted with a disarming warmth. And truth be told, the mouth-watering aroma wafting from the kitchen was utterly irresistible. So I agreed, settling into a sturdy wooden chair at their quaint dining room table. The food was delicious, a hearty pot roast with root vegetables harvested directly from their own garden. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily. The Albrights were full of questions about my research, my background, my family. In retrospect, a chilling clarity now illuminates how intensely personal their inquiries were becoming, how intently they watched my every reaction. But I was too caught up in the moment, too enthralled by the wealth of information I was gathering, to notice the subtle shift. It wasn't until dessert that the first insidious tendrils of unease began to truly coil around me. Mrs. Albright brought out a homemade pie, setting it on the table with a flourish, the scent of cinnamon filling the air. "It's a special recipe," she said, her eyes twinkling with what I then mistook for benign warmth. "Been in the family for generations." I took a bite and immediately noticed something profoundly strange about the taste. It was sweet, yes, but with an underlying bitterness that made my tongue tingle with an unpleasant sensation. "What kind of pie is this?" I asked, trying desperately to keep my tone casual, unaffected. Mr. Albright chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that resonated oddly in the quiet room. "Oh, it's our own special blend," he drawled, that unnerving glint returning to his eyes. "Helps people relax. That's what it does." That's when I noticed the room starting to subtly spin. My limbs suddenly felt incredibly heavy, and my thoughts, once clear, were becoming thick and foggy. With growing, sickening horror, I realized the undeniable truth. I'd been drugged. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey, refusing to cooperate. I stumbled, catching myself clumsily on the edge of the table. The Albrights made no move to help me. Instead, they watched with an eerie, detached calmness, their earlier warmth replaced by a chilling, calculating coldness. What did you do to me? I slurred, fighting desperately to stay conscious, to keep the encroaching darkness at bay. Mrs. Albright's smile transformed, twisting into something cruel, utterly devoid of kindness. Now, dear, don't fuss, she purred, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It'll all be over soon. You'll be joining our family, just like the others. My blood ran cold at her words. Others? How many innocent people had fallen into this horrifying trap before me? With the very last vestiges of my strength, a surge of desperate adrenaline, I lunged clumsily for the door. But Mr. Albright, despite his advanced years, was surprisingly swift. He caught me easily, his grip unexpectedly strong for a man his age. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, his voice a low, guttural rumble. "This town needs new blood, and you're it." I struggled weakly against his unyielding hold, but the insidious drug was now taking full, devastating effect. The room swam violently before my eyes, and darkness, like an encroaching tide, crept in at the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw before finally losing consciousness was Mrs. Albright's face, her kindly grandmotherly facade utterly replaced by something ancient and hungry. I woke to complete darkness and the overwhelming smell of damp earth. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't recall where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back with a brutal clarity. The dinner, the tainted pie, the Albright's sinister plan. I tried to move, only to find my wrists and ankles bound tightly, painfully secure. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the oppressive gloom, I realized I was in some kind of cellar. The walls were rough, unforgiving stone, and the only light came from a single, small barred window near the ceiling. I could hear movement above me, muffled footsteps, and indistinct voices. Panic threatened to utterly overwhelm me, but I forced myself to think. I needed to find a way out of this. I twisted my wrists, testing the bonds, but they were frustratingly secure. Whoever had tied them knew exactly what they were doing. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting of faint light through the tiny window. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the remnants of the drug still coursing sluggishly through my system. Each time I woke, I clung to the desperate hope that it had all been a terrible dream. But the ropes digging painfully into my skin and the cold, unyielding stone floor beneath me were all too real. Finally, I heard the creak of a door opening above, followed by light spilling down a set of stone stairs. Two figures descended, Mr. and Mrs. Albright, looking for all the world like a sweet elderly couple, save for the chilling, malevolent gleam in their eyes. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Albright chirped, her voice sickeningly sweet, as if this were a normal social call. "I do hope you slept well." I glared at them, finding my voice at last, though it was hoarse and weak. "What do you want from me?" Mr. Albright chuckled. That same unsettling, dry sound from the night before. "It's not about what we want," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "It's about what the town needs. New blood, new life. And you, my dear, are going to provide it." As they spoke, the horrible, chilling truth began to fully dawn on me. This wasn't just about two deranged individuals, the entire town was in on it. The seemingly friendly locals, the quaint, picturesque facade, it was all a meticulously crafted trap designed to lure in unsuspecting outsiders like myself. "Why you can't keep me here?" I stammered, trying desperately to sound braver than I felt. "People will come looking for me." Mrs. Albright's smile widened, revealing a glint in her eyes that was utterly terrifying. "Oh, I don't think so," she purred. "You told us yourself, dear. No family, no close friends, just you and your research. Nobody will miss you for quite some time. And by then, well," she trailed off, leaving the horrifying implications hanging heavy in the damp air. They left shortly after, promising to return with food later. As the cellar door clicked shut, plunging me back into darkness, a profound despair washed over me. They were right. I had been so utterly focused on my research, so eager to immerse myself in this community, that I'd completely isolated myself from everyone else. could be weeks before anyone even realized I was missing. But I couldn't give up. I had to find a way out. I spent hours working frantically at my bonds, ignoring the searing pain as the ropes chafed my skin raw. I meticulously examined every inch of the cellar, searching for weaknesses, for anything I could possibly use to my advantage. Days blurred into a terrifying haze of fear and desperate planning. The Albrights came regularly, bringing meager food and water, always watching me with those unsettling, expectant eyes. They spoke in cryptic whispers of preparations being made, of a ceremony to come. I tried to coax more information out of them to understand the full horror of their plan, but they remained frustratingly vague. It was on the 5th day of my horrifying captivity that I finally caught a desperate break. Mrs. Albright came alone, carrying a tray of food. As she set it down, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Age, I realized with a sudden surge of hope, was finally catching up with her. Despite whatever sinister forces were at work in this town, I saw my chance and seized it. As she leaned in to adjust my bonds, I surged upward, headbutting her with every ounce of my remaining strength. She went down with a sharp cry, the keys to my chains clattering loudly to the stone floor. Ignoring the excruciating pain exploding through my skull, I maneuvered myself clumsily over to the keys. It was awkward and painstakingly slow with my hands still bound. But sheer desperation lent me a surprising strength and flexibility I didn't know I possessed. I had just managed to free myself when I heard heavy footsteps pounding down the stairs. Mr. Albright burst into the cellar, his face contorted with pure rage. But I was ready. I ducked swiftly under his grasping hands and bolted for the stairs. The next few minutes were a blur of adrenaline and raw terror. I raced frantically through the house, hearing Mr. Albright's labored breathing and furious grunts behind me. I burst out the front door and onto the street, only to find myself faced with a group of townspeople, their expressions a chilling mix of shock and anger. For a moment I froze, certain that this was the terrifying end. But then primal survival instinct kicked in again. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my entire life. I could hear shouts behind me, the sound of pursuit growing as more people joined the terrifying chase. I ran without direction, my only thought to put as much distance as humanly possible between myself and my captors. The quaint town blurred around me, picturesque storefronts and white picket fences rapidly giving way to open fields and then, mercifully, dense forest. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned with searing agony, and my legs felt like lead. But every time I thought about stopping, I remembered the dark cellar, the Albright's cruel, knowing smiles, and I found a new, desperate reserve of energy. Finally, mercifully, I broke through the tree line and found myself on a highway. I flagged down the very first car I saw, probably looking like a raving madwoman with my wild eyes and torn clothes. The startled driver, a middle-aged man in a business suit, listened to my breathless, frantic explanation and immediately called the police. What followed was a whirlwind of police statements, unsettling hospital visits, and traumatized phone calls to my disbelieving family and thesis advisor. The authorities took my story with chilling seriousness, organizing a full-scale raid on the town. But by the time they arrived, the place was eerily deserted. The Albrights, the other residents, everyone, gone without a trace. In the months that followed, as I painstakingly tried to piece my shattered life back together, I couldn't shake the haunting memory of those 5 days. The raw terror, yes, but also the chilling realization of how easily I'd walked into their meticulously laid trap. My thesis remained unfinished. How could I possibly continue to study rural communities when every small town now held the insidious shadow of potential, hidden danger? But slowly, gradually, I began to find a new, unexpected direction. I started rigorously researching cults, delving into the complex psychology of isolated communities. I wanted desperately to understand what could possibly drive an entire town to such unspeakable extremes. Now, years later, I still occasionally catch myself looking nervously over my shoulder in unfamiliar places. The experience changed me profoundly. It made me more cautious, more acutely aware of the insidious darkness that can hide behind the most benign, innocent facades. But it also, paradoxically, showed me my own fierce strength, my unwavering will to survive. I never returned to that town. As far as I know, it remains abandoned, a chilling ghost town with a terrible, unspoken secret. But sometimes on dark, windy nights, when the wind howls just right, I can almost hear Mrs. Albright's voice, sweet and terrible, "You'll be joining our family, just like the others." And I shudder, profoundly grateful for my narrow escape and for the hard-won wisdom it brought at such an incredibly heavy price. Story 3. The moment I spotted the armed figures through the telephoto lens of my camera, I knew my peaceful nature photography trip had plunged into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. What I didn't realize was how swiftly I'd be running for my life through the very wilderness I'd come to capture. I'd always been passionately drawn to wildlife photography. There's something truly magical about freezing a moment in time, capturing the raw, untamed beauty of nature in a single frame. That fervent passion is precisely what led me to this remote corner of the Pacific Northwest, miles from the nearest town and even further from anything resembling civilization. I've been out here for nearly a week, my tent a temporary home amidst the towering pines and rugged landscape. The solitude was a profound bliss, broken only by the calls of birds and the occasional rustle of animals moving through the underbrush. Each day I'd wake with the sun, eager to see what new wonders I might capture through my lens. On this particular morning, I set out just as the first delicate rays of sunlight were painting the sky in ethereal hues of pink and gold. I had a specific location in mind, a small clearing where I'd spotted a family of deer the day before. I was hoping to catch them in the soft morning light, maybe even capture a fawn taking its first tentative steps. The hike was invigorating, the crisp morning air filling my lungs as I carefully picked my way along the faint trail. The familiar, comforting weight of my camera gear felt reassuring on my back. As I neared the clearing, I instinctively slowed my pace, moving as quietly as possible to avoid startling any wildlife. I reached the very edge of the clearing and crouched low, meticulously surveying the area before stepping into the open. That's when I saw them, 3 men, clad in camouflage, each carrying high-powered rifles. They were clustered around something large on the ground. My breath hitched in my throat as the horrifying realization dawned. It wasn't a deer they were standing over, but a bear. A massive grizzly, its magnificent coat now tragically stained red. These weren't hunters, this was poaching, plain and simple. Without a second thought, driven by a surge of pure instinct, I raised my camera and began to furiously snap photos. The telephoto lens brought the grim scene into razor-sharp focus. The men's faces, the menacing glint of their guns, the tragically still form of the dead bear, undeniable evidence. My heart was pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs, yet my hands remained miraculously steady, years of practice taking over. I was so utterly consumed by the act of capturing the scene, meticulously framing each shot, that I failed to notice one of the men look up. I missed the subtle nudge he gave his companions, the pointed finger in my direction. It wasn't until I heard the sharp, guttural shout that the full, horrifying weight of my mistake crashed down on me. "Hey, you there!" I instinctively dropped to the ground, but it was already too late. They had seen me. Panic surged through me, a cold wave of terror, as I heard them begin to move, their footsteps heavy and purposeful in my direction. I scrambled backward, staying low to the ground, then spun and ran. The forest that had seemed so tranquil just moments before now felt suffocating, a labyrinth of oppressive obstacles designed to trip me up. Branches whipped violently at my face as I crashed through the dense underbrush, the relentless sound of their pursuit behind me spurring me on. I ran blindly, without direction, my singular thought to put as much distance as humanly possible between myself and those ruthless poachers. My lungs burned with a searing agony, and my legs ached with a deep, punishing fatigue. But sheer fear propelled me forward. I could hear them shouting to each other, their voices chillingly close for comfort. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, I burst out of the dense trees onto a rocky, exposed slope. I paused for a precious moment, gasping for air, desperately trying to get my bearings. That's when the gunshot cracked, a sharp, terrifying report that echoed violently through the valley, followed by the unnerving whine of a bullet whistling far, far too close. They were shooting at me. This wasn't about scaring me off anymore. They intended to silence me permanently. I dove behind a large, jagged boulder, my heart hammering so fiercely I thought it might rupture from my chest. What in the world had I stumbled into? I was no action hero, just a wildlife photographer who had unwittingly walked into something far grander and infinitely more dangerous than I could have ever conceived. Another shot rang out, sending chips of rock exploding from the boulder barely inches from my head. I needed to move. I needed to find better cover. My eyes darted frantically around, searching for any conceivable escape route. The slope continued its upward climb, becoming increasingly steep and treacherously rocky. It would be difficult terrain, agonizing to ascend, but it might just be enough to slow my relentless pursuers down. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I sprinted from behind the boulder, zigzagging erratically as I scrambled upward. More shots followed, but the uneven, unpredictable ground seemed to throw off their aim. I didn't dare look back, focusing every ounce of my dwindling energy on the arduous climb. I finally reached a small, precarious ledge and allowed myself a moment's fleeting rest, pressing myself flat against the cold rock face. The shouts of the men were more distant now, but still far too close for any semblance of comfort. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't maintain this punishing pace for long. I needed a plan. That's when a flicker of hope ignited. My satellite phone, safely tucked away in my backpack. If I could just snatch a moment, a precious few seconds, to make a call to alert the authorities. But first, I needed to find a truly safe spot. I continued my climb, moving as swiftly and silently as my exhausted body would allow. The terrain became increasingly treacherous, demanding every ounce of my concentration to navigate safely. The menacing voices of my pursuers gradually faded, replaced only by the ragged sound of my own labored breathing and the thunderous pounding of my heart. Finally, I reached a small, cave-like opening carved into the rock face. It wasn't deep, but it offered precious shelter and a chance to finally catch my breath. I squeezed inside, wincing as my camera bag scraped painfully against the rough rock. I'd completely forgotten I was still clutching it, the instinct to protect my valuable gear ingrained after years of fieldwork. With shaking hands, I unzipped my backpack and pulled out the satellite phone. As I fumbled to turn it on, my heart sank into the pit of my stomach. The screen remained stubbornly dark. Dead battery? I'd been so utterly absorbed in my photography over the past few days that I'd completely neglected to charge it. A crushing wave of despair washed over me. I was utterly alone, being hunted by armed, desperate men with absolutely no way to call for help. For a fleeting moment, I actually considered surrendering. Perhaps if I explained, if I promised to delete the photos. No, I couldn't possibly take that risk. These men had already demonstrated their chilling willingness to kill. I had to keep going. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. I allowed myself a few more precious minutes of rest, then reluctantly emerged from the dubious safety of my rocky shelter. The sun was high in the sky now, its relentless heat making my clothes cling unpleasantly to my sweat-drenched skin. I desperately needed to find water soon, or dehydration would become as immediate and deadly a threat as the poachers themselves. I continued moving, meticulously sticking to areas with more natural cover. Every snapping twig made me flinch violently, every shifting shadow seemed to conceal a hidden threat. Hours bled into one another this way, the relentless strain of constant vigilance taking an agonizing toll. As the light began to softly fade, I knew I needed to find a place, any place, to spend the night. The chilling thought of being out here in the pitch black, knowing those men were still actively searching for me, made my skin crawl. But I had no other choice. I located a dense thicket of thorny bushes and crawled inside, ignoring the painful scratches from the branches. It wasn't comfortable in the slightest, but it offered a measure of concealment. I curled up, attempting to make myself as small and inconspicuous as possible. Sleep was an absolute impossibility. Every distant sound sent a jolt of terror through me, making me tense, expecting to see the glint of a gun barrel poking through the leaves. I clutched my camera bag tightly to my chest, the evidence it contained now feeling far more like a curse than an asset. As the first faint light of dawn began to filter tentatively through the dense leaves, I heard a new sound, a rhythmic thudding that grew steadily louder by the second. I held my breath, not daring to move a single muscle. The thudding grew into a roaring crescendo, and then, suddenly, a large, dark shape passed directly overhead. A helicopter. My heart leaped with a frantic, desperate hope someone was looking for me. I burst out of my cramped hiding place, waving my arms frantically, my voice raw as I screamed for attention. The helicopter circled back, hovering lower, its powerful rotors churning the air. I could clearly make out the words Forest Service emblazoned on its side. As it finally touched down in a nearby clearing, a wave of profound relief, so overwhelming it nearly buckled my knees, washed over me. Park rangers poured out, rushing swiftly to my side, their questions a blurry, indistinct murmur. Was I hurt? Were the men still in the area? Did I need immediate medical attention? I managed to stammer out my harrowing story, physically handing them my camera to show them the damning photos. Their faces grew grim, their expressions hardening as they grasped the full extent of what I had unwittingly uncovered. One of the rangers, an older man with kind, knowing eyes, gently placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You've been incredibly brave," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But you're safe now. We'll take care of everything from here." As they led me towards the helicopter, I took one last, lingering look at the vast, untamed wilderness around me. It was as breathtakingly beautiful as ever, the morning sun painting the landscape in soft, golden light. But now, I truly knew the darkness that could lurk, hidden and malevolent, even in the most ostensibly beautiful places. I was alive. I had survived, and I possessed the irrefutable evidence to bring those ruthless poachers to justice. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying me back towards the distant promise of safety, I made a silent, solemn promise to myself. I would return to the wild. I would not allow this terrifying experience to rob me of my deep-seated passion. But next time, I would be better prepared, far more cautious, and perhaps, just perhaps, a little bit braver. Story 4. The moment I found the first threatening note pinned to our cabin door, I knew our romantic getaway had taken a sinister turn. What I didn't realize was how swiftly it would escalate into a terrifying fight for survival in the very wilderness we'd come to enjoy. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I had been meticulously planning this trip for months. We both held demanding, high-stress jobs in the bustling city and desperately craved some time away from the constant noise and unrelenting pressure. When we discovered this secluded cabin online, nestled deep within the mountains with no neighbors for miles, it seemed utterly perfect. A week of profound peace, quiet, and each other's company. Precisely what we needed to reconnect and recharge. The drive up was breathtakingly beautiful. The winding road snaking through dense, ancient forests and alongside crystal-clear streams. As we pulled up to the cabin, I felt the familiar tension of the past few months begin to gently melt away. The cabin itself was everything we'd hoped for, rustic yet comfortably cozy with a wide, inviting porch overlooking a stunning, verdant valley. That first evening was idyllic. We unpacked slowly, cooked a simple dinner together, and then sat on the porch hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. As darkness inexorably fell, we marveled at the stars, so much brighter here than in the light-polluted city. We went to bed that night feeling utterly relaxed and optimistic about the week ahead. The next morning, I woke early, eager to explore our new surroundings. I slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to disturb Sarah, and headed to the porch to savor my morning coffee. That's when I saw it, a piece of paper pinned conspicuously to the cabin door, fluttering slightly in the gentle morning breeze. Curious, I walked over and unpinned it. As I read the crude words scrawled on the paper, a cold, unsettling chill ran straight down my spine. "You don't belong here. Leave now or else." I stood there for a moment, the note clutched in my hand, trying desperately to process what I was reading. Was this some kind of crude joke? A prank orchestrated by the cabin owners to scare city folks? But something about the messy, forceful handwriting, the sheer aggression with which the note had been impaled on the door, felt too real, too undeniably threatening. I debated whether to tell Sarah. I didn't want to ruin our precious vacation over what might still be nothing. In the end, I decided to keep it to myself for now. I crumpled up the ominous note and shoved it deep into my pocket, fiercely determined not to let it spoil our day. We spent the morning hiking, enjoying the crisp mountain air and the breathtaking scenery. Sarah was in high spirits, pointing out interesting plants and exotic birds, her carefree laughter echoing melodically through the trees. I tried my best to match her enthusiasm, but the chilling note kept nagging persistently at the back of my mind. A dark cloud on an otherwise bright day. When we returned to the cabin that afternoon, I knew immediately that something was profoundly wrong. The door was slightly ajar, though I was certain, absolutely certain, we'd locked it meticulously before leaving. Sarah noticed my sudden hesitation. "What's wrong?" she asked, her smile fading as she sensed my unease. "Probably nothing," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice felt tight. "Just thought I locked the door, that's all." We entered cautiously. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. But then I noticed another piece of paper laid conspicuously on the kitchen table. My heart plummeted as I picked it up and read, "This is your second warning. Next time, we won't be so nice." Sarah read it over my shoulder, her face paling rapidly. "What's going on?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who left this?" I had no choice then but to tell her about the first note. As I explained, I could see the cold, creeping fear growing in her eyes, mirroring my own rising panic. "We should leave," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Pack up and go home. Now." Part of me agreed wholeheartedly with her, screaming to flee. But another part, a stubborn, angry part, refused to be chased away from our vacation by some unseen, malevolent threat. "Let's not overreact," I said, trying desperately to sound more confident than I felt. "It's probably just some locals trying to scare us off. We'll be more careful. Keep the doors locked. If it happens again, we'll leave." "Okay." Sarah hesitated for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly, though her eyes still held a deep worry. We spent the rest of the day confined to the cabin, jumping violently at every innocuous sound. That night, neither of us slept well, taking anxious turns to keep watch, straining our ears for any disturbance. The next morning, we woke to a truly devastating sight. Our car's tires were slashed. Any lingering doubts about the seriousness of our situation vanished in that chilling moment. This wasn't a prank or a misunderstanding. Someone wanted us gone, and they were escalating their threats dangerously. "We need to call for help," Sarah said, her voice tight with raw fear. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, we were miles from the nearest cell tower. The old landline in the cabin was dead too. "Okay," I said, trying desperately to think clearly through the rising tide of panic. "Okay, we can't drive out. The nearest town is too far to walk. But there's a ranger station about 5 miles down the mountain. If we start now, we can make it there before dark." We packed quickly, taking only what we could easily carry. As we were about to leave, we found one last note, grimly pinned to the door. "You had your chance. Now you pay." The hike down the mountain was excruciatingly tense. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made us freeze, our hearts pounding. Were we being watched? Followed? The beautiful, inviting forest that had seemed so welcoming just days ago now felt oppressive, teeming with hidden threats. We were about halfway to the ranger station when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of an engine. Someone was coming up the road. "Help!" Sarah shouted, sprinting towards the sound. "We need help!" I ran after her, a desperate surge of relief flooding through me. But as the vehicle finally came into view, that relief turned to ice in my veins. It wasn't a ranger truck or a passing tourist. It was a battered old pickup truck, and the two men inside didn't look friendly in the slightest. "Sarah, run!" I yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her fiercely off the road. We plunged headlong into the dense forest, the furious shouts of the men and the roar of the truck's engine chillingly close behind us. We ran blindly, branches whipping violently at our faces, gnarled roots threatening to trip us at every desperate step. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the sheer panic of flight. But eventually, mercifully, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced only by our own labored breathing and frantic, pounding hearts. We found ourselves in a small, secluded clearing, both of us gasping for air, our lungs burning. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked between ragged breaths, her voice raw. I looked around, desperately trying to get my bearings. The sun was getting low. We'd been running for hours. "We can't go back to the road," I said. "They'll be looking for us there. We need to keep moving." Try to circle around to the ranger station. As night fell completely, the forest transformed into a different, more menacing world. Shadows seemed to shift and writhe, and every sound was brutally magnified. We stumbled onward, using the faint guidance of the stars to try to keep our direction. But I knew, with a sinking certainty, that we were hopelessly lost. We were utterly exhausted, consumed by fear, and slowly, desperately beginning to lose hope. Then we saw it, a faint, flickering light through the trees. Cautiously, we approached. It was a small cabin, smoke lazily rising from its chimney. For a terrifying moment, we hesitated. What if this was them, the very people who had been relentlessly threatening us? But we were out of options. We needed help. I knocked tentatively on the door, my heart lodged in my throat. After a long, agonizing moment, it opened to reveal an old man. His weathered face creased with confusion. "Please," I said, my voice hoarse and raw, "we need help. Someone's after us." The old man's expression swiftly changed from confusion to deep concern. He ushered us inside, locking the door securely behind us. As Sarah and I collapsed into chairs, utterly spent, he busied himself making hot tea and calling the ranger station on a crackling, antiquated radio. Over the next hour, we recounted our harrowing story. He listened gravely, nodding slowly, as if this wasn't the first time he'd heard such a chilling tale. "You're not the first," he said quietly when we'd finished. "There's a group around here. Don't like outsiders. Think these mountains belong to them. They've scared off plenty of folks over the years." "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice still shaky. "Why do they care if people visit?" The old man simply shrugged. "Some say they're protecting the land. Others think they're hiding something. Truth is, no one really knows." We spent the night at the old man's cabin, too utterly exhausted and profoundly relieved to worry about the propriety of it. In the morning, rangers arrived to escort us back to town. As we drove away from the mountains, I couldn't help but look back. The forest was as breathtakingly beautiful as ever in the morning light. But now I knew, with a chilling certainty, the darkness that could lurk even in the most picturesque, seemingly tranquil places. We never returned to those particular mountains, but the experience changed us profoundly. We became more cautious, more acutely aware of the potential dangers that can hide behind even the most beautiful facades. But it also, paradoxically, showed us our innate strength, our remarkable ability to face fear and to survive. Now, years later, when I see a secluded cabin advertised online, I still feel a complex mix of emotions. A part of me still longs for that profound peace and solitude. But I also vividly remember the terror of those days, the chilling realization that sometimes isolation can be as much a trap as a refuge. We still travel, still seek out beautiful, remote places, but we do it with open, knowing eyes, profoundly aware that even in the most idyllic settings, there can be shadows. And we're stronger for it, ready to face whatever challenges come our way, together. Story 5. The moment we realized all the trails back to civilization had been cunningly blocked or disguised, I knew our casual hiking trip had spiraled into a nightmarish game of survival. What I didn't anticipate was how swiftly we'd find ourselves fighting for our lives against an unseen enemy in the very wilderness we once thought we knew so well. This was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, just me and my 3 best friends, Liam, Sarah, and Alex, taking full advantage of the perfect fall weather to explore some new trails deep in the Appalachian Mountains. We'd been planning this trip for months, poring over maps and excitedly discussing the spectacular views we'd encounter. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. The weather was crisp and clear, the fall foliage painting the mountains in brilliant hues of red, orange, and gold. We hiked for hours, our spirits high, stopping often to take photos and marvel at the sheer beauty surrounding us. As the sun began to set, we found a perfect spot to set up camp for the night. Sitting around the campfire that evening, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was why we came out here, to escape the chaos of our daily lives and reconnect with nature and each other. If only I'd known then how quickly things would change. The first subtle sign that something was wrong came early the next morning. I woke before the others and decided to take a short walk to stretch my legs. As I moved through the trees, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was off. The forest seemed too quiet, the usual morning chorus of birds noticeably absent. Then I saw it, a quick flash of movement in the underbrush. I froze, straining my eyes to discern what had caught my attention. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure ducking behind a tree, but when I blinked, there was nothing there. Unsettled, I hurried back to our campsite. The others were just starting to stir, and I debated whether to mention what I'd seen, not wanting to alarm them over what was probably just my imagination. I kept quiet. We packed up camp and set off, planning to hike to a nearby ridge known for its stunning vistas. But as we walked, that feeling of unease grew stronger. More than once, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, convinced we were being watched. It was Liam who first voiced the chilling thought aloud. "Guys," he said, his voice tight, "does anyone else feel like we're being followed?" The fragile relief I felt at hearing someone else articulate my creeping concerns was short-lived. As we all stopped to listen, the forest around us seemed to hold its breath. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. That's when we heard it. A twig snapping somewhere off to our left. We all whirled towards the sound, but there was nothing to see but trees and shadows. "It's probably just an animal," Sarah said, but her voice quavered with undeniable uncertainty. We picked up our pace, the carefree atmosphere of the morning evaporating in an instant. As we walked, we found ourselves clustering closer together, our eyes darting nervously from tree to tree, searching for any sign of movement. It was early afternoon when we realized we'd made a terrible mistake. In our haste and growing paranoia, we'd veered off the main trail without even noticing. We found ourselves in a part of the forest none of us recognized. "No problem," Alex said, pulling out his GPS. "We'll just backtrack to the main trail." But as we tried to retrace our steps, we made a chilling discovery. The path we'd taken seemed to have utterly vanished, obscured by fallen branches and disturbed undergrowth. It was as if someone had deliberately tried to erase our trail. Panic, cold and sharp, started to set in as we realized the horrifying implications. Someone was out there, and they didn't want us to leave. We spent the next few grueling hours trying desperately to find our way back to a marked trail, any trail. But every path we took seemed to lead us deeper into the wilderness. Worse, we kept finding unsettling signs that we weren't alone. Strange markings on trees, small, deliberate piles of stones that seemed too precise to be natural. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, we were forced to accept a terrifying truth. We were lost, and someone out there wanted us to stay that way. We made camp that night in a small clearing, our nerves frayed to the breaking point. Nobody spoke much as we set up the tents, each of us lost in our own spiraling fears. We decided to take turns keeping watch, none of us willing to risk being caught off guard. I took the first watch, sitting with my back against a tree, straining my ears for any sound out of place. The hours crawled by, each rustle of leaves making me flinch. It was near the end of my shift when I saw it, a light flickering between the trees. At first, I thought I was imagining things, my tired mind playing cruel tricks on me. But no, there it was again, definitely real and definitely moving. I woke the others and we huddled together, watching as the light weaved through the trees. It seemed to be circling our camp, never coming too close but never straying too far. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We can't stay here," Liam said, his voice grim. "They know where we are. We need to move." It was a terrible idea, trying to navigate the unfamiliar forest in the pitch dark. But the alternative, waiting to see what our unseen watchers had planned, was far worse. We packed up as quietly as we could and set off, using only the dim light of the moon to guide us. The going was slow and treacherous, every step a potential twisted ankle or worse. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when we heard it. Voices calling out in the darkness behind us. They were still distant, but clearly searching and getting closer. Panic lent us a desperate speed, and we started to run. I lost track of how long we fled through the dark forest. Branches whipping painfully at our faces, gnarled roots threatening to trip us at every desperate step. The voices behind us grew louder, then faded, then grew loud again. They were toying with us. I realized with a chilling certainty, like cats playing with mice. Just when I thought we couldn't possibly go on, when my lungs were burning and my legs felt like lead. We burst out of the tree line onto a dirt road. For a moment, we all stood there, gasping for breath and staring at this unexpected sign of civilization. "Which way?" Alex panted, his breath coming in ragged bursts. I looked both ways down the road, trying desperately to orient myself. That's when I saw the headlights in the distance, coming our way. Relief, pure and overwhelming, flooded through me. "Here!" I shouted, waving my arms frantically. "Over here!" But as the vehicle got closer, that relief turned to ice in my veins. It wasn't the police or a park ranger. It was a battered old pickup truck, and the men inside didn't look friendly in the slightest. "Run!" Liam yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her back towards the trees. We plunged back into the forest, the furious shouts of the men and the roar of the truck's engine chillingly close behind. We ran blindly, no longer caring about direction or stealth, our only thought to put desperate distance between us and our relentless pursuers. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the sheer panic of flight. But eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced only by our own labored breathing and frantic, pounding hearts. We found ourselves at the edge of a steep ravine, a river churning far below. We were trapped. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling, on the verge of tears. I looked at the others, saw the raw fear and utter exhaustion in their faces. We were out of options. "We have to cross," I said, pointing to a massive fallen tree that spanned the ravine like a precarious bridge. "It's our only chance." The crossing was terrifying. The logs swayed ominously beneath our feet, slick with treacherous moss and rot. One misstep would mean a fatal plunge into the churning rapids below. But the fear of what lurked behind us was greater than our fear of falling. Somehow, miraculously, we all made it across. On the other side, we found a small cave hidden behind a curtain of tangled vines. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We huddled in that damp cave for what felt like days, taking turns to keep watch. We could hear our pursuers sometimes, their shouts echoing to each other as they relentlessly searched, but they never found our hiding place. It was on the third day that we heard the unmistakable thrum of a helicopter. At first, we were afraid to hope, but when we saw search and rescue emblazoned on its side, we knew we were saved. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and intense media attention. We learned that we weren't the first to be targeted by this group of mountain dwellers, who viewed outsiders as trespassers to be eliminated. But we were the first to escape and tell the tale. In the months that followed, as we struggled to process what had happened, we found ourselves dealing with a complex mix of emotions, profound relief at having survived, certainly, but also a lingering, chilling fear, a new awareness of the deep dangers that can lurk even in the most beautiful places. It took time, but eventually we all found our way back to the trails. Our first hike after the incident was tense, every snapping twig making us jump. But as we walked, feeling the sun on our faces and the earth beneath our feet, we remembered why we loved this so much in the first place. The wilderness had shown us its darker side. Yes, but it had also, paradoxically, shown us our own incredible strength, our innate resilience. We'd faced real, terrifying danger and come out the other side, and in doing so, we gained a deeper, more profound appreciation for the wild places of the world, their breathtaking beauty, their formidable challenges, and the incredible transformative effect they can have on the human spirit. Now, when I stand at a trailhead, I feel a complex mix of exhilaration and profound respect. The forest is no longer just a playground, it's a place of deep mystery and potential danger. And yet, I'm drawn to it more than ever before, because I know that out there, among the whispering trees and towering mountains, I'll find not just adventure, but a truer, more authentic version of myself. Story 6. The moment I realized the isolated camp was actually a trap. I knew my routine investigation had plunged into a desperate fight for survival. What I didn't expect was how swiftly I'd become the prey in a deadly game orchestrated by those I was meant to protect. I'd been a park ranger for over a decade, patrolling the vast, wild expanses of Yellowstone National Park. I thought I'd seen it all. Lost hikers, aggressive wildlife, even the occasional illegal camper. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered that fateful day in late September. The call came in early morning. Reports of strange activity deep in the backcountry. Hikers had mentioned seeing smoke where no legitimate campsite should be and hearing eerie, disembodied noises in the night. It wasn't entirely unusual for people to get spooked in the wilderness, but something about this particular report nagged persistently at me. I decided to check it out myself. I set out just as the sun was rising, the crisp autumn air filled with the invigorating scent of pine and wood smoke. The reported location was remote, a good day's hike from the nearest marked trail. As I made my way through the dense forest, I couldn't shake the growing feeling that something was deeply off. The woods were too quiet. The usual cheerful chatter of birds and small animals noticeably absent. It was late afternoon when I finally spotted the thin, telltale trail of smoke rising above the trees. I approached cautiously, years of rigorous training kicking in, my senses heightened. The camp came into view, a crude, haphazard assemblage of tents and makeshift shelters. But something wasn't right. There were no people visible, no sounds of activity whatsoever. I announced my presence, my voice clear and authoritative, identifying myself as a ranger. The only response was the whisper of wind through the trees. Slowly, my hand resting instinctively near my sidearm, I entered the camp. The place looked recently lived in. Embers still glowed faintly in a fire pit, and half-eaten meals lay abandoned on rough-hewn tables. It was as if everyone had suddenly, inexplicably vanished. That's when I saw the first body. He was partially hidden behind a tent, face down in the dirt. I rushed over, hoping against hope that he was merely unconscious or injured. But as I carefully rolled him over, I recoiled in visceral horror. His face was contorted in a grotesque mask of agony, eyes wide and staring. And there, starkly visible on his neck, were two small, unnerving puncture marks. My mind reeled, frantically trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was no animal attack I'd ever encountered. And where were the others? The camp was clearly set up for at least a dozen people. I keyed my radio, intending to call for urgent backup, but all I got was deafening static. Some unknown force, was jamming the signal. The terrifying realization hit me like a physical blow. I was utterly alone out here, cut off from any help. A twig snapped sharply behind me. I whirled around, drawing my weapon in one smooth, practiced motion, but there was nothing there, just shadows lengthening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Yet, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling of being watched. I needed to get out of there, to report what I'd found and bring in a full team. But as I turned to leave, I saw them. Figures moving at the very edge of the camp, partially hidden by the gathering gloom. They were human in shape, yes, but something about their movements was deeply off, too fluid, too predatory. "This is Ranger Mike Sullivan," I called out, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, authoritative. "Identify yourselves." A low chuckle was the only response, seeming to come from all around me, chillingly disembodied. Then, a voice, raspy and cold, pierced the silence. "Welcome, Ranger. We've been expecting you." My blood ran cold. This was no ordinary missing persons case. I was dealing with something far more sinister, something utterly outside my training. I ran. There was no shame in it, no hesitation. Every primal instinct screamed at me to get away, to put as much desperate distance as possible between myself and whatever unspeakable things lurked in that camp. I crashed wildly through the underbrush, branches whipping painfully at my face, gnarled roots threatening to trip me at every desperate step. Behind me, I could hear them in pursuit. They moved with an unnatural speed and grace, effortlessly keeping pace despite the incredibly difficult terrain. And all the while, that chilling, inhuman laughter echoed through the trees. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the blind, suffocating panic of flight. But eventually, I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood an old fire tower, its metal frame silhouetted starkly against the darkening sky. With no other options, driven by pure desperation, I made for the tower. The rusted ladder creaked ominously under my weight as I climbed, my pursuers' footsteps growing ever closer, their chilling laughter echoing below. I reached the small, enclosed room at the very top. Slamming the hatch shut behind me and securing it with a rusty chain I miraculously found in the corner. For a moment, all was blessedly quiet. I stood there, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. Then came a sickening thud from below, followed by another. They were climbing the tower. I looked around frantically for anything at all I could use as a weapon. The room was bare, save for an old rickety desk and chair, and a dusty first aid kit hanging on the wall. I grabbed the chair, holding it aloft, ready to fight for my life if they breached the hatch. The thuds grew louder, closer. The hatch shuddered violently as something heavy slammed into it from below. The chain held, but I didn't know for how long. As I stood there, heart pounding a furious drumbeat, a chilling memory surfaced. An old legend I'd heard around the ranger station, whispered late at night, stories of creatures that lurked in the deepest, most forgotten parts of the wilderness, preying on unsuspecting hikers. I'd always dismissed them as mere campfire tales, meant to scare rookies. Now, I wasn't so sure. Another bone-jarring slam against the hatch, and I saw the metal begin to visibly buckle. Whatever was down there, it was impossibly strong. Inhumanly strong. In a surge of desperate, primal instinct, I turned to the first aid kit. Inside, amidst the usual supplies, bandages, antiseptic, I found a small, tarnished silver cross that someone had long ago left behind. On a sudden, wild hunch, I grabbed the cross, its unexpected weight oddly comforting in my trembling hand. The hatch burst open with a screech of tortured metal, revealing a gaping maw. A figure pulled itself up, its movements fluid and unnaturally fast. In the dim light filtering into the room, I caught a terrifying glimpse of pale, translucent skin, elongated, razor-sharp canines, and eyes that glowed with an unholy, ancient hunger. Without thinking, driven by pure terror and a desperate hope, I thrust the silver cross forward. The effect was immediate and shocking. The creature recoiled violently with a piercing screech of pain. Thin tendrils of smoke rising from where the silver had touched its flesh. Taking advantage of its momentary distraction, I charged forward, pushing with every ounce of my might. The creature, caught completely off balance, tumbled backward through the hatch. I heard a horrifying series of thuds and inhuman shrieks as it plummeted down the tower. I slammed the hatch shut again, securing it as best I could with a mangled, twisted chain. But I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I was trapped, with no way down save for a 100-foot drop to the unforgiving ground. As if in answer to my desperate, unspoken thoughts, a new sound cut through the night, the rhythmic thud of helicopter blades. A powerful searchlight swept the area, momentarily blinding me as it passed directly over the tower. Hope, pure and overwhelming, surged through me. Someone had noticed I was missing and sent out a search party. But would they reach me in time? The creatures below seemed agitated by the noise and light. I could hear them snarling, their inhuman voices carrying chillingly clear in the night air. The hatch shuddered again as they renewed their furious assault. The helicopter drew closer, its piercing searchlight now zeroing in directly on the tower. I waved frantically, shouting at the top of my lungs, "Please, let them see me. Let them understand I'm in danger." Just as the hatch began to visibly give way, a rope ladder dropped from the hovering helicopter. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out onto the tower's small, precarious balcony and grabbed the ladder. My feet leaving the platform just as pale, clawed hands reached menacingly through the opening. As I was pulled to bless safety, I looked down. The creatures had emerged onto the balcony, their faces twisted in pure fury as their prey, their meal, escaped. Something that could not exist in our world. The debriefing that followed was utterly surreal. My harrowing story was met with a disturbing mix of disbelief and professional concern for my mental state. No bodies were found at the camp. No tangible evidence of the terrifying creatures I'd encountered. If not for the deep scratches on my arms and the battered silver cross I still clutched fiercely, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined the whole terrifying ordeal. In the end, the official report cited an unknown animal attack and hallucinations brought on by stress and possible exposure to toxic plants. But I knew the truth, and I knew that somewhere out there, in the deep, forgotten wilderness, they were still waiting, watching, hungry. I still work as a ranger. Someone needs to be out there, aware of the real dangers that lurk in the shadows. But I no longer patrol alone, and I never ever enter the backcountry without a silver cross around my neck. The wilderness holds many secrets, some breathtakingly beautiful, some utterly terrifying. That day, I glimpsed something that shook my understanding of the world to its very core. And while part of me desperately wishes I could forget, a larger, more resolute part knows that ignorance is not bliss, it's vulnerability. So I watch and I wait. And I pray that I'm prepared for the day when the creatures of the night decide to venture once more into the world of light. Story 7. The moment I woke to find a stranger's silhouette standing just beyond the dwindling glow of my campfire, I knew my peaceful solo camping trip had taken a sinister turn. What I didn't realize was how swiftly it would spiral into a terrifying game of psychological cat and mouse in the wilderness I once thought I knew intimately. I'd always been something of a lone wolf, finding far more comfort in the profound quiet of nature than in the relentless chaos of city life. That deep-seated preference is precisely why I decided to embark on a week-long camping trip deep within the majestic Adirondacks. Just me, my meticulously packed gear, and the boundless, untamed great outdoors. I discovered what felt like a perfect, secret spot miles from any marked trails or official campsites. A true sanctuary where I could utterly disconnect and recharge my weary spirit. The first few days were pure bliss. I spent my time hiking challenging trails, capturing breathtaking photos of the stunning landscape, and simply reveling in the simple, profound pleasure of being completely alone with my thoughts. Each night, I'd return to my secluded campsite, cook a simple, satisfying meal over my portable stove, and drift off to sleep serenaded by the gentle, comforting sounds of the forest. It was on the fourth day that a subtle, unsettling shift occurred. I'd gone for a particularly long hike, pushing myself further than I had on previous days. When I finally returned to my camp, utterly exhausted and ready to relax, I noticed something strange. My tent zipper was partially open. I was certain I had meticulously closed it fully before leaving that morning. A chill snaked down my spine as I approached cautiously. Inside, things seemed undisturbed at first glance, but as I looked closer, I realized items had been subtly moved. My sleeping bag was slightly askew, and my backpack wasn't where I'd left it. Someone had been in my tent. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, unsure what to do. Should I pack up and leave? But it was already late afternoon, and I was miles from anywhere. The thought of hiking out in the gathering dark was not appealing. I made a desperate decision. I would stay, but I would sleep with my hunting knife close at hand. That night, every snapping twig and rustling leaf had me on edge. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake at the slightest sound. The next morning, I awoke to find my boots, which I'd left outside the tent, moved several feet away. This was no animal. Someone was deliberately messing with me. I spent the day hiking nearby, partly to clear my head and partly to see if I could spot any signs of another campsite. But the woods seemed empty, save for the usual wildlife. As evening approached, I reluctantly returned to my camp. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by a large tree. My heart leaped into my throat. "Hello," I called out, trying desperately to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response. The figure didn't move. I took a hesitant step forward, and in that instant, they vanished into the deeper shadows of the forest. I ran to where they had been standing, but there was no sign anyone had been there. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat by my fire, knife gripped firmly in hand, jumping at every sound. As the flames died down to embers, I saw it again. A dark silhouette standing just beyond the fading circle of light, watching me. I stood up quickly, brandishing my knife. "Who's there? What do you want?" Again, no response. But this time, the figure didn't disappear. It just stood there, unnaturally still. In that moment, raw fear gave way to a cold, hard anger. I was tired of being toyed with. I charged forward, determined to confront whoever or whatever was tormenting me. But as I reached the spot where the figure had been, there was nothing. I spun around frantically, searching the oppressive darkness. But I was alone, or so I thought. A twig snapped sharply behind me, and I whirled to see the figure now standing precisely where I had been moments ago, next to my dying fire. How had they moved so quickly and silently? Panic surged through me, overwhelming and suffocating. This was no ordinary person. I ran blindly into the forest, no longer caring about direction or stealth. Branches whipped violently at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Finally, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. The forest was silent, save for my pounding heart and heaving breaths. As my eyes adjusted to the profound darkness, a terrifying realization dawned. I had no idea where I was. In my blind panic, I'd left everything behind: my tent, my supplies, even my flashlight. I was lost in the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on my back and my hunting knife. I spent that night huddled at the base of a large tree, shivering uncontrollably in the cool mountain air. Every subtle sound sent a jolt of fear through me, expecting to see that silent figure emerging from the shadows. But nothing came. As dawn broke, I tried desperately to orient myself. The rising sun gave me a general sense of direction, but I had no idea how far I'd run or which way would lead me back to civilization. I picked a direction at random and started walking, hoping to find a trail or a road. Hours passed, the sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Thirst clawed at my throat and hunger gnawed at my stomach. But worse than the physical discomfort was the constant, pervasive fear. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I expected to see that figure standing there, watching silently. It was late afternoon when I heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of running water. Hope surged through me, giving me a desperate burst of energy, and I quickened my pace. I burst through a line of trees to find a small stream gurgling over smooth rocks. The sight of clean, fresh water was almost enough to make me weep with relief. I fell to my knees, cupping the cool water in my hands and drinking deeply, splashing the refreshing liquid on my face and wounds. As I sat there, trying to decide what to do next, I froze. There, on the opposite bank, stood the figure. Even in broad daylight, I couldn't make out any discernible features. It was as if the shadows clung to it, obscuring any details. We stood there, facing each other across the narrow stream. I gripped my knife tightly, though I knew it would be useless if the figure could move as quickly and silently as it had before. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice hoarse and cracking from thirst and fear. For the first time, the figure moved. It raised an arm, pointing downstream. Then, in a blink, it was gone. I stood there for several minutes, unsure what to do. Was this another cruel trick? But I had no better options. Cautiously, I began to follow the stream in the direction the figure had indicated. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I heard something that made my heart leap with desperate joy, the distant sound of voices, human voices. I quickened my pace, hope lending surprising strength to my tired legs. I burst out of the tree line onto a small, dusty road. A group of hikers stood there, looking startled at my sudden appearance. I must have been quite a sight, clothes torn, face scratched, wild-eyed with fear and exhaustion. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, taking a hesitant step towards me, concern etched on their face. The story poured out of me in a rush. The tampering with my campsite, the silent, terrifying figure, my panicked flight through the forest. As I spoke, I saw the hikers exchange worried glances. They took me to the nearest ranger station, where I repeated my story to increasingly skeptical faces. The rangers organized a search of the area where I'd been camping, but found no evidence of an intruder. My tent and gear were there, undisturbed. There were no unexplained footprints, no sign that anyone else had been in the area. In the end, they chalked it up to an overactive imagination fueled by isolation and possible dehydration. They were kind about it, but I could see they didn't believe me. As I sat in the back of a ranger truck, being driven back to civilization, I couldn't shake the chilling memory of that silent, shadowy figure. Had it all been in my mind? A hallucination brought on by stress and solitude? But then I remembered how it had pointed downstream, leading me to safety. If it was just a figment of my imagination, how could it have guided me out of the wilderness? I never returned to those woods. The experience left me profoundly shaken, questioning what I thought I knew about the world and myself. But it also taught me something important: the wilderness, much like life itself, holds mysteries we may never fully understand. It can be beautiful and terrifying, peaceful and dangerous, often all at once. Now, years later, I still feel drawn to the outdoors, but I no longer seek total solitude. Instead, I've learned to appreciate the delicate balance between isolation and connection, between adventure and safety. And sometimes on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I remember that silent figure and I wonder if somewhere in the deep woods it's still out there, watching, waiting. A guardian or a threat? A protector or a predator? Perhaps in the end it's both. Story 8. The moment we heard the unmistakable hum of machinery coming from what was supposedly an abandoned building, I knew our casual exploration had taken a dangerous turn. What I didn't realize was how swiftly we'd find ourselves fighting for our lives in a town that should have been utterly empty. This was supposed to be a simple weekend adventure, my best friend. Marcus and I had always been fascinated by abandoned places. So, when we heard whispers about an old mining town nestled deep in the mountains, deserted for decades, we simply couldn't resist. We packed our cameras, some essential supplies, and set off early Saturday morning, brimming with excitement for the photos and stories we'd bring back. The drive was long and winding, taking us deeper and deeper into the mountains. As we approached the town, the paved road gave way to gravel, then to little more than a dirt track. The first buildings we saw were exactly what we'd expected: weathered wooden structures, their paint long since peeled away, windows broken or boarded up. It was eerily beautiful, nature slowly, relentlessly reclaiming what man had abandoned. We parked at the very edge of town and started exploring on foot, cameras at the ready. The main street felt like something ripped directly from an old Western film, complete with a dilapidated saloon and a crumbling general store. We spent hours photographing the crumbling buildings, imagining what life must have been like here in its forgotten heyday. As the afternoon wore on, we made our way towards what looked like it had once been the town's industrial area. The buildings here were larger, constructed of corrugated metal and concrete instead of wood. It was as we approached one of these imposing structures, an old processing plant, according to a faded peeling sign, that we heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining things, a low, rhythmic hum, almost lost beneath the whisper of wind through the empty buildings. But as we got closer, it became unmistakable, the distinct sound of machinery coming from inside a building that should have been silent for half a century. Marcus and I exchanged a look of confusion, quickly replaced by a thrilling, dangerous excitement. Maybe some other explorers got some of the old equipment working, he suggested, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his doubt. Curiosity, that ever-present lure, overcame caution, and we decided to investigate. The main doors of the plant were chained shut, but we found a side entrance that yielded to a bit of persuasion from Marcus's lockpicking skills, a hobby I'd always thought was a bit questionable until this precise, crucial moment. The interior of the plant was dark, thick dust motes dancing in the meager shafts of light that penetrated the grimy windows. The sound was louder now, a low, mechanical thrum echoing eerily off the metal walls. We moved carefully, our footsteps seeming unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. As we rounded a corner, we saw it, a section of the plant that was decidedly not abandoned. Lights flickered from modern, humming machinery, and the air was thick with an acrid, chemical smell. Before we could even begin to process the disturbing sight before us, a voice, harsh and demanding, rang out, "Hey, who the hell are you?" We spun around, our hearts leaping into our throats, to see a man in a hazmat suit, his face obscured by a respirator. For a frozen moment, we all just stared at each other, locked in a tableau of mutual, stunned shock. Then, Marcus grabbed my arm. "Run!" he yelled, and we bolted. We could hear shouts behind us as we sprinted back the way we'd come. My heart was pounding so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. What had we stumbled into? We burst out of the building into the fading afternoon light, but our relief was tragically short-lived. More shouts echoed from other buildings, and we saw figures emerging, all clad in similar hazmat suits. "This way," I gasped, pulling Marcus towards a narrow alley between two crumbling buildings. We ran blindly, No longer caring about stealth or direction, our only thought was to escape, to get back to our car and out of this living nightmare. But as we rounded a corner, we found our path abruptly blocked by a chain-link fence, old and rusting but formidable. I could hear our pursuers getting closer, their voices angry and threatening. "Over here," Marcus hissed, pointing to a low, grimy window in one of the buildings. Without hesitation, we scrambled through, finding ourselves in what looked like an old, dusty storehouse. We crouched low behind some crates, trying desperately to quiet our ragged, frantic breathing. Outside, we could hear the men searching, their voices drawing chillingly nearer. "What do we do?" I whispered, fear making my voice tremble uncontrollably. Marcus's face was pale, but his eyes were etched with grim determination. "We need to find a way to contact someone," he whispered back. "The police. The FBI, anyone." I nodded, reaching frantically for my phone. My heart sank as I saw the no service message stubbornly displayed on the screen. Of course, we were in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Suddenly, the door of the storehouse burst open with a loud bang. We pressed ourselves even closer to the ground, hardly daring to breathe. Footsteps echoed heavily through the room, coming closer to our hiding spot. Just when I thought we were about to be discovered, a voice called from outside, "Hey, check the processing plant again. Maybe they're hiding in there." The footsteps receded and the door slammed shut. We waited for several agonizing minutes before daring to move. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Find a way to higher ground. Maybe we can get a signal." We crept to the window, peering out cautiously. The street seemed empty for the moment. As quietly as we could, we climbed back out and started making our way towards the very edge of town, staying low and using the crumbling buildings for cover. We were almost to the outskirts when we heard the unmistakable sound of engines revving to life. Headlights cut through the gathering dusk as several vehicles started moving through the town. "They're searching for us," I realized with growing, sickening horror. We picked up our pace, no longer caring about stealth. As we reached the last building, we could see our car parked where we'd left it, tantalizingly close. But between us and freedom was an open stretch of ground, fully exposed. And worse, one of the vehicles was heading directly in our direction. "We'll never make it," pointing to an old mine shaft entrance nearby. "We can hide in there." It was a terrible idea. Who knew how stable that shaft was after all these years? But we were out of options. We sprinted for the entrance, diving inside just as the vehicle's headlights swept over the area. The shaft was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and decay. We moved deeper, using the faint light from our phones to avoid tripping over the debris littering the ground. The sound of the vehicle outside faded, replaced by an oppressive, terrifying silence, broken only by the chilling sound of water dripping somewhere in the absolute darkness. We walked for what felt like hours, the tunnel seeming to go on forever. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, Marcus grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing ahead. There, barely visible in the oppressive gloom, was a pinprick of light. Hope surged through me, a desperate, powerful wave, as we quickened our pace. The light grew larger, resolving into the unmistakable shape of an exit. We emerged on the other side of the mountain, the abandoned town nowhere in sight. In the distant, shimmering haze, we could see faint lights, a highway, or maybe another town. As we started the long, arduous hike towards civilization, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of something much bigger and far more dangerous. What were those men doing in that abandoned town? What were they producing in that old plant? It took us hours to reach the highway, where a bewildered truck driver picked us up and, after hearing our frantic, breathless explanation, took us to the nearest police station. We told our unbelievable story, watching the officers' faces change from skepticism to grave concern. In the days that followed, there were investigations. intense interviews with federal agents, and a media frenzy when the story finally broke. It turned out we'd stumbled upon a major drug manufacturing operation, one that had been using the isolated ghost town as perfect cover for years. Marcus and I were hailed as heroes, but I couldn't shake the nightmares, the feeling of being hunted, the acrid chemical smell, the cold, empty eyes of the hazmat suits. Our weekend adventure had truly turned into something far more dangerous than we could have ever possibly imagined. Now, years later, I still can't drive past an abandoned building without wondering what dark secrets it might hold. Our terrifying experience taught me that sometimes the ghosts in ghost towns are very much alive and far more dangerous than any supernatural specter. I've never lost my deep love for exploration, but I approach it now with a new, profound respect for the unknown and a keen awareness that not all abandoned places are truly empty. Some hold secrets, and some of those secrets bite back. Story 9. The moment the eerie singing echoed across the still water, I knew my night dive had taken a terrifying turn. What I didn't realize was that in mere moments, a peaceful underwater adventure would transform into a desperate fight for survival against something older than my own fear. I, Eris, a marine biologist with a passion for exploring the ocean's deepest mysteries, had come to a remote stretch of sea off Hawaii. This area was known for its pristine coral reefs and unique nocturnal ecosystem. My goal was to document the feeding behavior of rare bioluminescent fish, which only emerged after the sun had completely set. For over a week, I had meticulously prepared my equipment: high-intensity flashlights, specialized underwater cameras, and fully charged air tanks. The first few days passed wonderfully. I dived during the day to familiarize myself with the terrain, documenting the vibrant beauty of the colorful reefs. Each night, I eagerly awaited dusk, preparing for truly incredible dives. The silence of the ocean after nightfall was pure magic, only the sound of bubbles from my scuba gear and the gentle hum of the current. On the fifth night, I had reached a location I believed was perfect for my work. A mysterious underwater cave I had only coincidentally found on a previous dive. It wasn't large, just wide enough for me to move comfortably, but its spiraling rock formations seemed to create a natural concert hall under the sea, ideal for monitoring sounds and movements. As the sun dipped entirely below the horizon, painting the last streaks of color on the water's surface, I checked my dive computer. 8 p.m. Perfect timing. I slid gently into the inky black water, the light from my flashlight piercing the darkness, revealing a glowing world waiting to be explored. Schools of small fish darted past, their shimmering trails like shooting stars. I was ready to record something truly special, but as I swam deeper towards the cave, a strange sound drifted to my ears. It was a melody, something ethereal yet unsettling, seemingly coming from within the cave. At first, I thought it was the echo of the current or some marine animal vocalizing. But as I drew closer, the sound became clearer, more structured. It was a song. Not the song of whales, not the cries of seals, but a song. A deep, resonant, monophonic melody, ancient and haunting. A cold shiver ran down my spine, unrelated to the water's temperature. I turned off my flashlight, wanting to ensure I didn't disturb anything, wanting to listen more clearly. In the darkness, I floated, illuminated only by the bioluminescence of tiny organisms drifting past. The song continued, and a horrifying realization dawned on me. It wasn't coming from an animal. It was too complex. It had a rhythm. And then a single phrase repeated over and over in the underwater space: come. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been underwater thousands of times. I had heard thousands of ocean sounds. But this was something else. Something utterly alien. I switched my flashlight back on, sweeping it into the cave. Nothing. Only dark, damp rock walls. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps someone had hidden a waterproof recorder here? A research device? But as I swam deeper into the cave, the singing grew louder, more compelling, seemed to envelop me, seeping into my very bones. And then I saw it. Not a fish, not a person. It was a shape, a shimmering, tall, indistinct form, hovering in the center of the underwater concert hall. It wasn't bioluminescent, yet it seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a void in the glowing underwater world. The shape seemed to be composed of water and shadow, without clear boundaries. I tried to identify it, but there were no features to grasp onto. It was just a presence, and the singing came from it, a wordless, haunting lullaby that felt like an invitation. I should have turned back immediately, but a morbid curiosity held me transfixed. I turned off my flashlight again, letting myself sink into the darkness with the creature. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what it was. As I was in complete darkness, the singing became even clearer, like a voice whispering directly into my ear, piercing through the dive mask and the neoprene of my wetsuit. Join US. No, I realized. This wasn't an invitation. This was a summons to disappear. My survival instinct finally kicked in. I switched my flashlight to full power, sweeping it at the shape, but it had no effect. The shape had no eyes for me to meet. No distinct form for me to clearly see. It was just there singing. I turned, beginning to swim out of the cave, kicking my fins powerfully, desperate to escape the sound. I could feel the pressure of the singing intensify, trying to hold me back, to pull me closer. I swam upwards, towards the faint moonlight on the surface. But as I neared the cave's exit, a horrifying coldness washed over me. The singing became distorted, warped like a broken old record. And then other shapes, smaller, more indistinct, but numerous, emerged from the crevices of the cave, hovering between me and the exit. They were shadows. Shadows of the same thing. They had no clear form, just dark streaks in the water. But I could feel their presence. They blocked my path. My heart pounded furiously. My air tank was running low. I couldn't stay down here forever. I couldn't hold my breath much longer. I turned my flashlight to maximum power, aiming it at the shadows. They didn't react. They just hovered, singing, trying to draw me towards the larger, central shape in the cave. I made a desperate gamble. I picked a gap between two of the shadows and launched myself through. My body slid past them like slipping through cold water, but I felt a resistance. A chilling sensation, as if they were trying to absorb me. I had made it through. I swam at full speed, not daring to look back. I heard the singing change, becoming a guttural, enraged growl, but I didn't dare turn. I kicked my fins as hard as I could, bioluminescent trails of fish streaking past as I surged towards the surface. Finally, I broke through the water, gasping for air, discarding my scuba regulator. I pulled myself onto the kayak, trembling uncontrollably. The cold night breeze swept over my soaked wetsuit, but it felt like a comforting embrace. I had escaped. I turned my head to look back at the cave. In the darkness, nothing seemed different. No light, no shapes, just the black mouth of the underwater cave. But I knew what had been in there. I grabbed my satellite phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the emergency number. It rang in the still night air. I didn't know what I would say. There are singing water creatures in a cave and they want to pull me under? It sounded insane, but I had to report it. I had to warn them. The authorities arrived a few hours later. Mostly Coast Guard personnel. They looked at me with skepticism as I tried to explain. There was no evidence, nothing to record. I appeared unwell, paranoid, and slightly dehydrated. They took my statement, advising me to return to the city and get some rest. I knew they thought I was in shock and hallucinating, but I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. I never went back to that cave, and I never dived alone at night again. The experience changed me. The ocean, once my sanctuary, now held a new layer of darkness. I am still a marine biologist, but now I study what I can understand, what I can measure. Sometimes, on moonless nights, when I stand on the coast of Bien Hoa, Dong Nai, and look out at the inky black water, I can still hear it. The deep, haunting lullaby. Come, join us. And I know those creatures of the deep are still there, waiting. They are a part of the ocean, a part of the darkness we will never fully comprehend. And though I escaped, I know one thing for certain: the lullaby of the Black Sea will forever echo in my mind. A chilling reminder of what lies beneath the surface waiting to pull you down. Story 10. The moment he moved into the sprawling Victorian next door, I knew my life. Once a predictable melody of quiet evenings and morning coffees was about to hit a discordant note. I used to laugh at the idea of being afraid of my own shadow. Now every subtle shift in light, every unexpected creak sends my pulse into a frantic drum solo against my ribs. It began so innocently, didn't it? Don't all the best nightmares? The day Leo arrived was, at first glance, utterly forgettable. I was out on my patio tending to my beloved hydrangeas when a large moving van rumbled to a stop beside the long vacant house. Curiosity, that sly instigator of trouble, pricked at me. Who would my new neighbor be? That's when I first saw him, tall, with dark, watchful eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the world around him. He caught me observing, offered a polite wave, and I, ever the optimistic fool, waved back, thinking how pleasant it would be to have new life in the neighborhood. Oh! If only I had possessed the cruel gift of foresight then. Initially, Leo appeared perfectly amiable. He'd offer a casual nod whenever our paths crossed outside, and we'd exchange brief, forgettable pleasantries about the unpredictable weather or the latest local buzz. Yet, an unsettling undercurrent hummed beneath his polite facade, a subtle dissonance I couldn't quite pinpoint. Perhaps it was the way his gaze would linger a fraction too long, or his uncanny knack for always being outdoors precisely when I was. I began to notice his omnipresence more acutely. Leaving for my morning commute, he'd be there, perhaps checking his mailbox or meticulously watering his lawn. Returning home in the evenings, he'd be out front, a silent sentinel, as if awaiting my arrival. I chided myself, dismissing it as simple paranoia, a trick of a tired mind. Neighbors, after all, frequently encounter one another, don't they? But then, an insidious sensation began to creep in, the feeling of being perpetually observed, even within the supposed sanctity of my own home. I'd be engrossed in a book on my sofa, and a prickling chill would skitter up the back of my neck. I'd glance up, catching a fleeting shadow retreating from the window of the house next door. Once, I could have sworn I saw a curtain flutter back into place, as though someone had just withdrawn from an intense scrutiny of my living room. I started drawing my blinds, keeping them perpetually closed, but it offered no solace. The feeling of being watched only intensified, a suffocating presence. I'd awaken in the dead of night, heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I'd heard faint footsteps just outside my bedroom window. Yet, when I looked, the darkness always remained empty. Then came the notes, silent paper nightmares. The first one I discovered tucked beneath my car's windshield wiper. "You look beautiful when you sleep," it read, etched in disturbingly neat block letters. My stomach plummeted, a cold dread seizing me. My hand trembled as I reread the words, again and again. I desperately tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a note intended for someone else, but a cold certainty deep within me knew better. After that, my car was always parked in the garage, a futile attempt at protection. It didn't deter the notes. They would appear on my porch, slip beneath my front door, even nestled unsettlingly in my mailbox. Each new message was more chilling than the last. "I love watching you make coffee in the morning," one proclaimed. "That red dress looks amazing on you. Why did you close your curtains? Don't you want me to see you?" I went to the authorities, but their hands were tied. The notes weren't explicitly threatening, and I had no concrete proof of the sender. They suggested installing security cameras, which I promptly did. It was useless. Whoever was leaving the notes was a ghost, an expert at evading their digital eyes. I knew with a terrifying certainty it had to be Leo. Who else could it be? But proof was an elusive phantom, and whenever I saw him, he was unfailingly courteous. "How are you doing?" he'd inquire, his voice laced with faint concern. "Are you sleeping okay? You look tired. Is everything all right?" It was a perverse dance, as if he were deliberately taunting me, relishing in my unraveling. I tried to disrupt my routine, leaving for work at different times, taking circuitous routes home, but somehow, he always seemed to anticipate my movements. I'd spot his car parked on the street when I went grocery shopping, or find him in the same obscure coffee shop I ducked into to avoid going straight home. One night, the sharp buzz of my phone ripped me from sleep. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're so peaceful when you sleep." I bolted upright, my heart hammering so violently I feared it might burst from my chest. My gaze shot to the window, expecting to see Leo's face pressed against the glass, but there was only the indifferent darkness. I couldn't endure it any longer. Sobbing, I called my sister and recounted everything. She insisted I come stay with her, and I, desperate, agreed. My hands trembled so uncontrollably as I packed my bag. I could barely manage to zip it closed. As I was loading my car, Leo emerged from his house. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual, but his eyes held an unnerving intensity. "Just visiting my sister for a few days," I lied, attempting to keep my voice steady to project a normalcy I was far from feeling. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Have a safe trip. I'll keep an eye on your place while you're gone." The way he uttered those words sent an icy tendril of dread crawling up my spine. I scrambled into my car and drove away, watching him in my rearview mirror. He stood there, a static, unsettling silhouette, watching me disappear around the corner until he was lost from sight. I stayed with my sister for a week, experiencing the deepest, most restorative sleep I'd had in months. But a cold, unyielding truth gnawed at me I couldn't hide forever. I had to return, had to confront this insidious presence. I wouldn't let him win. When I finally pulled back into my driveway, everything appeared unervingly normal. No new notes, no signs of forced entry. For a few days, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled within me. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps Leo had moved on, or finally grasped the terrifying extent of his actions. But then, one evening, as I was preparing dinner, a faint noise drifted up from my basement. It was a soft, muffled thud, almost imperceptible, yet in the oppressive quiet of my house, it echoed like a gunshot. I froze, the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables clutched in my trembling hand. I stood there, barely breathing, straining to catch any other sound. For an agonizing moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it again, a soft creak like the groan of a loose floorboard. My mind reeled. Should I call the police? But what if it was nothing, simply my paranoia playing cruel tricks? I would appear ridiculous, a hysterical woman, and an empty basement. I took a deep, fortifying breath, steeling myself. I had to know. I couldn't endure this perpetual state of terror, jumping at every sound, a prisoner in my own home. With the kitchen knife still clutched tightly in my hand, I slowly made my way towards the basement door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I paused, listening intently once more. Silence. Perhaps I had imagined it after all. Just the settling of an old house. But I had to be certain. I opened the door, flicking on the light switch. The bare bulb sputtered to life, casting stark, dancing shadows across the cluttered space. Everything appeared normal. Boxes stacked against the walls, old furniture draped in dusty sheets, the washing machine a silent sentinel in the corner. I took a tentative step down, then another. The wooden stairs groaned beneath my weight, and I winced at the loud sound. I reached the bottom, my eyes darting frantically, searching for anything amiss. That's when I saw it. A door I'd never noticed before, partially concealed behind a towering stack of boxes. My breath hitched in my throat. How could I have never seen this? I'd lived in this house for years, yet I had never known there was another room down here. I approached slowly, my heart thudding so loudly I was convinced anyone in the house could hear it. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of impenetrable darkness visible in the narrow gap. With trembling fingers, I reached out and pushed it open. The hinges groaned, a mournful sound echoing in the stillness of the basement. The room beyond was cloaked in shadow, but I could vaguely discern shapes: a solitary chair, a small table, and something covering the walls. I fumbled for my phone, activating its flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the space, and a chilling horror washed over me, a cold dread that seized my very blood. The walls were utterly plastered with photographs, hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, and every single one was of me. Me leaving for work, me checking the mail, me sitting on my couch absorbed in a book, me sleeping in my bed. Intimate moments I had believed were utterly private, all captured and meticulously displayed like some grotesque, twisted art gallery. In the unsettling center of the room, a table stood, laden with stacks of papers. I moved closer, my legs feeling impossibly heavy like lead. They were printouts of my text messages, my emails, my entire browser history, all mine. Every intimate detail of my digital life laid bare, exposed for some unseen observer to scrutinize. And there, placed prominently in the middle of it all, was a notebook. I picked it up with shaking hands, opening it to the very first page. The handwriting was sickeningly familiar, the same neat, block letters from the chilling notes. Day 1. She moved in today. She's perfect. I've been waiting so long for someone like her. I flipped through the pages, my horror escalating with each entry. It meticulously detailed every aspect of my life, my daily routines, my private conversations, my most intimate habits. Things I did when I believed myself to be utterly alone. Private moments I never imagined anyone else would ever know about. The final entry, scrawled in that same unsettling hand, was from that very morning. She's back. I knew she'd come back to me. Tonight we'll finally be together. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly, erratically across the horrifying room. And there he was, Leo, standing silently in the doorway, a serene smile gracing his lips, and a chilling glint in his eyes that curdled my blood. "Welcome home," he said softly, his voice a silken thread of dread. "I've been waiting for you." Story 11. The engine sputtered and died, plunging me into an abyssal sea of darkness. This stretch of highway, a ribbon of asphalt I traversed 100 times, had never felt so utterly desolate, so menacing. As I sat there, the oppressive silence pressing in around me, a chilling realization solidified: I was exquisitely vulnerable. It was then, in the suffocating quiet, that I saw them, headlights, growing steadily larger in my rearview mirror. I'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, making my solitary way back from a business trip that had stretched on for far too long. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, abandoning me to the rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt and the sporadic flicker of my headlights catching a distant road sign. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak, the kind that makes your eyelids feel like lead and your thoughts drift into a fuzzy haze. I should have pulled over at that last gas station, topped off the tank, grabbed a strong coffee. But the allure of my own bed, the promise of forgetting spreadsheets and presentations, had been too strong. So I pushed on, foolishly ignoring the gas gauge as it spiraled lower and lower. When the engine first coughed, then sputtered, I tried to rationalize it away. Nothing, just a hiccup, maybe some bad fuel. But a cold dread settled deep in my gut, a primal knowing that I had stretched my luck too thin, and now the universe was collecting its toll. The car rolled to a silent halt on the shoulder, its headlights cutting a pathetic, small swath of visibility in the inky blackness. I sat there for a long moment, my hands still white-knuckled on the steering wheel, as if by sheer force of will I could coax life back into the machine. No such magic. I fumbled for my phone, squinting against the harsh glare of the screen in the pervasive darkness. No signal. Of course, I was truly stranded, utterly isolated in the middle of nowhere, surrounded only by the silent sentinels of trees and the vast, empty fields. Help felt like a distant galaxy, a million miles away. That's when I saw them again, headlights in the distance, steadily growing larger, pulling me from my despair. A wave of profound relief washed over me, a beacon in the oppressive night. Another car meant another human being, someone who could offer assistance, or at the very least, make a call for a tow truck once they reached an area with cellular service. I stepped out of my silent car, waving my arms frantically, desperate to flag down the approaching vehicle. The headlights dipped, slowing, and a hesitant smile finally bloomed on my face. Perhaps, just perhaps, my luck was finally turning. The vehicle, an older model pickup truck that had clearly seen better days, pulled up behind me and came to a stop. Its headlights remained on, forcing me to squint against the blinding glare as a figure emerged from the driver's side. "Car trouble?" a man's voice called out, surprisingly friendly. "Yeah," I replied, my voice a little hoarse as I shielded my eyes with one hand. "I think I ran out of gas. You don't suppose you have a spare can with you?" The man chuckled, a low, gravelly sound that didn't quite reach his eyes as he stepped into the pool of light between our vehicles. I could finally make out his features, older, perhaps in his 50s. With a face weathered by sun and time and eyes that seemed to absorb every detail in a single glance. "No gas, I'm afraid," he said, drawing closer, "but I've got some tools in the truck. Maybe we can take a look, see if it's something else." I hesitated, a faint alarm bell tolling softly in the back of my mind. Something about his fluid movements, the way his eyes never quite met mine, felt off. But what alternative did I possess? I was marooned here, utterly alone, with no means of communication. "That would be great, thanks," I managed, striving to keep my voice steady, betraying none of the apprehension that was beginning to coil in my stomach. He nodded, turning back to his truck. As he rummaged around in the bed, I seized the fleeting opportunity to study him more closely. His clothes were grimy, as if he'd spent the entire day toiling outdoors. A dark stain marred his shirt, darker than mere dirt. But in the poor, deceptive light, I couldn't be certain. When he turned back to me, he held a flashlight and a toolbox. "Let's take a look under the hood," he said, moving towards my car. I popped the hood, stepping back, watching as he leaned in, his flashlight beam sweeping over the engine. He muttered to himself as he worked, words I couldn't quite decipher. "So," he said suddenly, without looking up from the engine, "what brings you out here so late?" "Just heading home from a business trip," I replied, attempting to sound casual, nonchalant. "Guess I miscalculated how much gas I had left." He grunted in response, then straightened up, wiping his hands on his grimy jeans. "Well, it's not the battery," he stated, "and I don't see any obvious leaks. Probably is just out of gas." I nodded, unsure of how to proceed, what to say next. The man stood there, simply looking at me with an unnerving intensity that made me profoundly uncomfortable. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone conversational, almost benign, yet his eyes remained sharp, piercing. "Just up to Cedar Grove," I offered, naming a town about an hour up the road. It wasn't my actual destination, but something, an insistent whisper of instinct, urged me not to divulge too much to this unsettling stranger. He nodded slowly, a faint, unsettling smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Cedar Grove, huh? That's quite a ways from here. You got family there?" I shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of the vast, isolating emptiness of this dark stretch of road, the profound solitude that surrounded us. "No, just home," I said, attempting to keep my voice light, casual. "Listen, I really appreciate you stopping, but maybe I should just call for a tow truck." The man's smile broadened, but it remained fixed, not reaching the cold depths of his eyes. "No cell service out here," he stated, a sweeping gesture indicating the empty, desolate road around us. "Nearest town's about 20 miles that way." He pointed down the road in the direction I'd been heading. My heart plummeted. 20 miles. It might as well have been 100. "Tell you what," the man continued, closing my car's hood with a resounding thud that made me jump, "I can give you a ride to town. There's a gas station there. We can get you some gas and bring it back here." Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to flee. This man, this entire situation, it all felt profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. But what other alternative did I have? I couldn't remain stranded here all night, and the prospect of walking 20 miles in the inky darkness was simply not an option. I don't want to put you out," I stammered, desperately trying to buy time to concoct some plausible escape. The man waved his hand dismissively. "No trouble at all," he said, his voice a smooth, unsettling balm. "I'm headed that way anyhow. Wouldn't feel right leaving you out here all alone. Never know what kind of folks might come along." The bitter irony of his words, hanging heavy in the night air, was not lost on me. I forced a brittle smile, my mind racing. "That's really kind of you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But maybe I should just wait here. My boyfriend is expecting me. He'll probably come looking for me when I don't show up." The man's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of something raw flash across his face. Anger? Disappointment? It was gone too swiftly for me to be certain. "Boyfriend, huh?" he said, his tone abruptly cooler, laced with a subtle disdain. "Funny, I didn't see a ring on your finger. Most guys would have put one there by now if they cared about you." An icy chill slithered down my spine. How had he noticed my bare hands? I hadn't even shaken hands with him. "We're not really the marrying type," I said, attempting to keep my voice steady, to project an air of casual indifference I was far from feeling. "Listen, I think I'll just wait here. But thank you for stopping." The man took a deliberate step closer, and I had to actively fight the visceral urge to back away, to flee into the surrounding darkness. "Now, don't be like that," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone. "I'm just trying to help. It's not safe out here for a pretty little thing like you. All sorts of bad people around." My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly I was convinced he could hear its frantic rhythm. I opened my mouth to offer a response, to utter another feeble excuse, but before I could, a sound sliced through the oppressive silence of the night, the distant, familiar rumble of an approaching engine. We both turned simultaneously, our gazes drawn down the long, dark road. Headlights appeared in the distance, steadily growing larger, a glorious beacon. A wave of profound, overwhelming relief washed over me. Another car. Another person. Someone who could, perhaps, extract me from this escalating nightmare. The man's demeanor shifted instantly, a practiced, alarming transformation. He stepped back, his face once more a mask of friendly, guileless concern. "Well, would you look at that?" he exclaimed, his voice now jovial, a forced cheerfulness. "Looks like your luck's changing already." The approaching vehicle, a towering semi-truck, began to slow as it neared us. The driver, bless his soul, must have spotted my stranded car on the side of the road. As it pulled to a stop, I saw the man from the pickup truck tense, his eyes darting quickly between me and the massive truck, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "Everything okay here?" a new voice boomed as the truck driver, a burly man with a kind, weathered face, climbed down from his cab. "Just a little car trouble," I called back, the relief evident, almost overflowing, in my voice. "I ran out of gas." The truck driver nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I've got a spare can in the truck," he said, "let me grab it for you." As he turned back to his vehicle, I saw the man from the pickup truck take a decisive step towards his own car. "Well," he said, his voice now tight, strained, "it looks like you're in good hands now. I'll be on my way." Before I could even formulate a response, he was in his truck, the engine roaring to life with a sudden, almost violent burst. He pulled away quickly, tires squealing faintly on the asphalt as he disappeared into the engulfing darkness of the night. The profound tension that had gripped my entire body slowly drained away, leaving me weak, trembling slightly. The truck driver returned with the gas can, and as he helped me meticulously fill up my tank, I couldn't shake the chilling sensation of how incredibly close I had come to something. I didn't know precisely what, but a cold certainty resonated within me. It wouldn't have been good. As I finally pulled back onto the deserted road, my hands still faintly shaking on the steering wheel, I made a solemn promise to myself. No more pushing my luck, no more ignoring those insistent whispers of instinct, and definitively, absolutely no more running out of gas on dark, lonely highways. Because sometimes, the true monsters aren't lurking beneath your bed or skulking in the deepest shadows. Sometimes they are standing right there, in plain sight, extending a seemingly helpful hand and offering a deceptively friendly smile. Story 12. The moment I stepped into that dimly lit hallway, a prickling sensation crawled up my spine, a silent alarm screaming that something was terribly amiss. The air felt heavy, pregnant with an unspoken threat, a suffocating premonition. But by the time my mind fully registered the danger, it was already too late. The door clicked shut behind me with an ominous finality, trapping me within a nightmare of my own unwitting creation. I'd never given much thought to the inherent risks of my job as a food delivery driver. Sure, there were the occasional rude customers, the labyrinthine apartment complexes designed to confound, but nothing genuinely perilous. It was merely a means to accrue some extra cash while I navigated the final stretch of my degree. Yet, that night irrevocably altered everything. It began like any other shift. I picked up an order from Luigi's Pizzeria, a large pepperoni and a 2-liter soda, utterly unremarkable. The delivery address led to an apartment complex nestled on the far outskirts of town, a place I hadn't visited before, though that was hardly uncommon given our expansive delivery radius. As I drove, the familiar, well-lit main roads gradually dissolved, giving way to darker, narrower streets. Houses became sparse, replaced by overgrown, wild lots and the occasional dilapidated, forlorn building. I double-checked my GPS, convinced I must have taken a wrong turn, but no, the digital voice insisted this was the correct path. Finally, I saw it looming in the distance, a massive, imposing apartment building that appeared to have long since surrendered to the ravages of time. Its brick facade was stained and crumbling in places, and half its windows stared out like vacant, dark eyes. It certainly didn't resemble the kind of establishment that would be ordering a pizza delivery at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I parked my modest car in the nearly empty lot, grabbing the pizza and drink. As I approached the main entrance, I noticed the security door was propped open with a brick. That should have been my very first warning sign. A blaring siren in the quiet night, but my focus, narrow and determined, was solely on completing the delivery and swiftly moving on to the next order. The lobby was bathed in a sickly, flickering glow from fluorescent lights that cast eerie, dancing shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The elevator, a relic from another era, looked as though it hadn't functioned in years. So I opted for the stairs. The order was for apartment 4C. As I ascended, the stairwell grew progressively darker. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I was forced to resort to my phone's flashlight to illuminate my path. The hallway offered little improvement, only every third light seemed operational, creating vast, menacing patches of oppressive darkness interspersed with pools of sickly yellow light. I made my way down the hall, the numbers on the doors ticking up, 4A for B. I paused in front of 4C, my hand raised to knock. That's when I noticed it. The door was slightly ajar. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a hesitant question as I nudged the door open a fraction more. "Pizza delivery?" No response. Only the profound, suffocating silence. I should have left then. Should have simply set the pizza down, marked the order as delivered, and fled as fast as my legs could carry me. But I didn't. Perhaps it was the magnetic pull of a potential tip, or perhaps just my own foolish, ill-fated curiosity. Whatever the impetus, I took a tentative step inside. Hello? Is anyone home? I've got your pizza order here. The apartment was cloaked in shadows, save for the faint, pale glow emanating from a television in what I presumed was the living room. I took another step, my eyes straining to adapt to the oppressive dimness. That's when I heard it, the soft, definitive click of the door closing behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. A figure stood there, a silent silhouette against the now closed door. How had I not seen them? Sorry? I stammered, attempting, futilely, to keep my voice steady. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just delivering the pizza you ordered. The figure remained motionless, a silent, unyielding sentinel. It did not move, did not speak. Simply stood there, an insurmountable barrier blocking my sole exit. I felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down my back. Look, I can just leave the pizza here and go, I offered. Desperation creeping into my tone. No charge, okay? Finally, the figure spoke. It was a man's voice, low and gravely, a sound that seemed to scrape against the very air. Why don't you come in and set it down? I'm sure you could use a break. Every primal instinct within my body screamed at me to run, to flee, but where could I go? He was a looming obstacle, blocking the only exit I knew. I clutched the pizza box tighter, as if the cardboard could somehow offer protection against the unseen threat. That's okay, I said, attempting to project a calm I was far from feeling. I've got other deliveries to make. I'll just leave this here. I set the pizza and soda down on a small, dusty table near the door, then turned back to the man. If you could just move aside, I'll be on my way. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a fresh wave of ice-cold dread coursing down my spine. But you've only just arrived. Why don't you stay a while? He took a deliberate step towards me and I instinctively recoiled, backing away. My foot caught on something, a loose rug, perhaps, and I stumbled, catching myself on the wall to regain my balance. As I did, my hand brushed against a light switch. Without conscious thought, driven by pure instinct, I flipped it on. The sudden, brutal flood of light momentarily blinded me. As my eyes slowly adjusted, battling against the harsh glare, I finally got my first clear, horrifying look at the man, and the disturbing tableau of the apartment behind him. He was older than I had anticipated, probably in his 50s, with thinning, graying hair and a scraggly, unkempt beard. His clothes were grimy and worn, hanging loosely on his thin, almost emaciated frame. But it was his eyes that truly seized my attention, cold, calculating. With a chilling glint of something I couldn't quite place, something profoundly dangerous lurking within their depths. Behind him, the apartment was a chaotic mess. Piles of yellowed newspapers and empty food containers littered every conceivable surface. The walls were utterly covered in what appeared to be newspaper clippings and frantic, handwritten notes. But what truly made my blood run cold, freezing in my veins, were the photographs. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of photos were tacked to the walls, overlapping, covering every inch of available space. And they were all of me. Me getting into my car. Me delivering pizzas to other, distant addresses. Me walking into my own apartment building. Me simply living my life. Some were clearly taken with a long-range lens, intimate moments observed from afar, while others looked as though they had been snapped from just a few feet away, unnervingly close. What the hell is this? I gasped, my voice barely above a strangled whisper. The man's lips curled into a smile, a grotesque distortion that did not reach his cold eyes. I've been waiting for you for a long time, Alex. He knew my name. Of course, he did. He'd been watching me, stalking me for who knew how long. How? Why? I couldn't form a coherent thought. My mind reeling, struggling desperately to process the horrifying reality unfolding before me. He took another deliberate step towards me. You're special, Alex. I knew it from the moment I first saw you. We're meant to be together. I felt bile rise in my throat, a bitter, acidic taste. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of grotesque nightmare. Look, I said, trying desperately to keep my voice from shaking to project an authority I certainly didn't feel. I don't know who you are or what you want, but this isn't okay. I'm leaving now, and I'm calling the police. I reached instinctively for my phone, but before my fingers could even grasp it, he lunged, his hand clamped around my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, an iron vice for such a thin man. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, all pretense of friendliness, all semblance of sanity utterly gone from his voice. I reacted on pure, primal instinct, fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline. I brought my knee up hard with all my might, directly between his legs. He let out a strangled grunt of pain, and his grip momentarily loosened, just enough for me to wrench my arm free. I shoved him as hard as I could, sending him stumbling backward, collapsing into a precarious pile of newspapers. I ran for the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, thunderous rhythm in my ears. But as my trembling hand reached for the handle, I realized with a fresh wave of horror that it was locked. Not just locked, but secured with a deadbolt that required a key from both sides. No, I muttered frantically, my fingers fumbling uselessly, desperately trying to turn the unresponsive lock. Behind me, I could hear him stirring, getting to his feet, cursing under his breath. I spun around, my eyes darting frantically, searching for any other possible way out. The windows were barred. I had noticed that when I first entered, but hadn't given it a second thought. Now, those formidable bars loomed like the unyielding gates of a prison. He was fully on his feet now, advancing towards me with a look of pure, unadulterated fury contorting his face. "You shouldn't have done that, Alex," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "We could have done this the easy way." I backed up until my spine pressed against the cold wall, my eyes frantically scanning the cluttered room for anything, any object I could potentially use as a weapon. My gaze landed on the 2-liter bottle of soda I had brought with the pizza. Without a moment's hesitation, driven by desperation, I snatched it up and hurled it at him with all my remaining strength. The bottle connected squarely with his face, a sickening thud, sending him reeling backward. I heard a sickening crunch as his nose undoubtedly broke, and blood immediately began to gush, staining his scraggly beard a grotesque crimson. He howled in pain and raw, unbridled anger providing me with the fleeting opening I so desperately needed. I bolted past him, deeper into the apartment, a blind dash for survival. I had no plan, no coherent idea of where I was going, but anywhere was preferable to being trapped against that locked door. I found myself in what must have been the bedroom. More photos adorned the walls here, along with disturbingly detailed notes about my daily routine. On the bedside table, a collection of objects sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, items I instantly recognized as my own. A pen I thought I had lost weeks ago, a crumpled receipt from my favorite coffee shop, even a small, unsettling handful of my own hair. The horrifying realization of how long he had been watching me, how incredibly close he had been this entire time, made me feel physically ill. But I couldn't dwell on that now. I needed to find a way out, and fast. The sound of his heavy footsteps thudding in the hallway snapped me back to the grim reality. I looked around frantically, my eyes falling upon a window. Unlike the windows in the living room, this one wasn't barred. I rushed over to it, pulling and pushing, desperately trying to force it open. Years of paint and disuse had sealed it shut, making it stubbornly stick. But with a sudden, desperate burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, I managed to shove it upward. Cool night air rushed in, a life-giving breath, and I had never smelled anything so sweet, so utterly liberating. I was on the fourth floor, a daunting height, but there was a fire escape tantalizingly close, just a few feet to my left. If I could just reach it. Alex. His voice was closer now. Just outside the bedroom door, a predatory purr. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out onto the windowsill, my body half in and half out of the apartment. A precarious balance between two terrifying realities. The fire escape was agonizingly close, but not quite close enough to simply step onto. I'd have to jump. The bedroom door burst open just as I tensed, preparing to leap. I heard him yell something, a guttural sound, but the frantic blood pounding in my ears drowned out his words. I pushed off from the window with every ounce of my remaining strength, my arms outstretched towards the rusted, life-saving metal of the fire escape. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, I was flying, suspended in the cool night air. Then my hands connected with the rough railing, the jarring impact sending shocks of raw pain up my arms, but I held on, clinging desperately. I scrambled. Half climbed, half fell, down the fire escape, not daring, not for a single second, to look back. When my feet finally hit the ground, I jumped the last few feet and ran. I ran like I had never run before, a desperate, frantic sprint fueled by sheer terror, not stopping, not even pausing for breath, until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so uncontrollably I could barely manage to get the key into the ignition, but finally, miraculously, the engine roared to life. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching in protest against the asphalt, leaving that nightmare building far behind. It wasn't until I was miles away, safely parked in a brightly lit gas station parking lot, that I finally allowed myself to shatter. Sobs racked my entire body as the full, overwhelming weight of what had just happened crashed over me. A tidal wave of terror and disbelief. I called the police, of course. They searched the apartment, but found it utterly empty. He was gone. A phantom, along with all the horrifying photos and every shred of evidence of his sickening obsession. They took my statement, promising to remain vigilant, to keep an eye out. But I could discern the unspoken truth in their expressions. They held little hope of ever finding him. I quit my delivery job that very night, packed what remained of my life, and moved to a new apartment across town. But even now, months later, the insidious feeling of being watched lingers, a cold, persistent shadow. Every time I catch sight of a security camera, every time I glimpse someone observing me for a fraction too long, a chilling question echoes in my mind. Is it him? Has he found me again? I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. But I do know one thing, with a bone-deep certainty, I'll never look at a late-night food delivery the same way again. Because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the deepest shadows. Sometimes they're the ones inviting you in, with a deceptive smile and a seemingly innocent pizza order. Story 13. The walls seemed to whisper secrets of forgotten lives. Each faded poster a silent scream for help. As I stood in that dimly lit room, surrounded by the faces of the missing, I realized I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than an abandoned cabin in the woods. Little did I know, my fleeting curiosity would lead me down a treacherous path from which I might never escape. It was meant to be a simple hiking trip, a chance to shed the accumulating stress of city life and clear my head for a tranquil weekend. A coworker, a quiet fellow named Ben, had enthusiastically recommended this particular secluded trail. "It's off the beaten path," he'd said, his eyes alight with the promise of untouched nature. "But the views are absolutely worth it." What Ben had conveniently failed to mention, however, was the unsettling, almost palpable sensation of being watched that settled over me the instant my boots touched the ancient soil of those woods. The trail itself was barely discernible, severely overgrown in parts. I found myself constantly consulting my crumpled map and compass, desperate to ensure I was maintaining the correct direction amidst the encroaching wilderness. As the day wore on, the forest seemed to grow denser, the towering trees pressing in closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, grasping at the fading light. It was late afternoon when I first caught sight of it, a faint glint of something unnatural through the thick curtain of trees. At first, my mind, attempting to rationalize the anomaly, suggested it might be the shimmering surface of a hidden lake or a winding river, the sun's reflection dancing off the water. But as I drew nearer, pushing through stubborn thickets and ducking under low-hanging branches, the chilling truth dawned. It was the unmistakable glare of sunlight on a window pane. The cabin seemed to materialize out of nowhere, a weathered, somber structure of dark, decaying wood and a roof that sagged with age. It looked ancient, the kind of place that had stood sentinel for generations, silently witnessing the slow, relentless march of time. I approached with extreme caution, my footsteps crunching loudly on the thick carpet of dead leaves. The rational part of my brain, a small, insistent voice of reason, urged me to turn back, to simply resume my journey along the trail and pretend this eerie discovery had never occurred. But curiosity, that irresistible, dangerous siren, seized control. After all, what genuine harm could possibly come from a quick, innocent peek? The porch groaned ominously under my weight as I ascended the rickety steps towards the front door. It was slightly ajar, as if extending an eerie, silent invitation. "Hello," I called out, my voice a tentative, wavering question, but only a profound silence answered. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at the loud, grating groan of rusted hinges. The interior was plunged into oppressive darkness, thick with the musty odor of decay and a pervasive layer of dust. Shafts of late afternoon sunlight, thin and ethereal, cut through the gloom, illuminating swirling motes of dust that danced like lost souls in the air. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the dim, oppressive light. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a skeletal remains of a home, an old couch with springs grotesquely poking through its faded fabric, a rickety table surrounded by mismatched, forlorn chairs, a pot-bellied stove standing silently in a corner. But it was the walls that truly seized my attention, drawing my gaze like an unseen force. Every single inch of available space was utterly covered in paper. At first, I assumed they might be old newspapers or faded magazine clippings, relics of a bygone era. But as I moved closer, a cold dread began to seep into my veins, turning my blood to ice. They were missing person posters, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, plastered haphazardly over every surface, a macabre collage of lost faces. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling slightly, and activated its flashlight to get a clearer, more terrifying look. The faces stared back at me, a silent, pleading chorus, men, women, children of all ages and races. Some of the posters were yellowed with age, their ink faded and barely legible, spectral whispers of the past. Others appeared newer, the paper still crisp and stark white, unnervingly fresh. My hands shook uncontrollably as I examined them more closely, the full horror beginning to sink in. The dates on the posters spanned decades, the earliest I could discern dating back to the 1970s, a chilling timeline of disappearances. But what truly made my skin crawl, what sent icy tendrils of fear down my spine, was the unsettling commonality. Every single poster listed a town or city within a 100-mile radius of the very spot where I stood. I moved deeper into the cabin, my flashlight beam dancing erratically across the horrifying walls. In the small, cramped kitchen, more posters. In the tiny bedroom, they covered every conceivable surface, even clinging to the ceiling, a suffocating canopy of despair. It was like being trapped within a macabre art gallery, each face a frozen moment of someone's last known whereabouts, a silent testament to their tragic disappearance. As I turned to leave the bedroom, something caught my eye, a faint detail amidst the overwhelming horror. Poster partially obscured, tucked behind others, featured a face that looked eerily, disturbingly familiar. I peeled it back slowly, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm in my chest. a drumbeat of burgeoning fear. It was Ben, my coworker, the one who had so casually, so innocently directed me to this very trail. The poster was dated just 2 weeks ago. I stared at his smiling, unsuspecting face, my mind reeling, struggling desperately to reconcile the impossible. How was this conceivable? I had seen him at work the day before I embarked on this trip. He couldn't be missing, unless a profound, bone-chilling dread washed over me as the horrifying implications finally, irrevocably, sank in. What if he wasn't missing at all? What if he had deliberately sent me here, knowing full well what I would find? The subtle creak of a floorboard behind me made me whirl around, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic swathe through the oppressive darkness. For a fleeting split second, I was convinced I saw a shadow move, a fleeting distortion in the periphery of my vision. But when I focused directly on the spot, there was nothing there. My heart was pounding so violently I could feel its frantic rhythm in my throat, a suffocating pulse. I needed to escape this place. Now, I made my way back to the front room, moving as swiftly and silently as my trembling legs would allow. But something compelled me to pause at the door, a persistent, nagging feeling that I couldn't simply leave without proof, without something tangible to present to the authorities. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and began to take pictures. Sweeping shots of the walls, individual close-ups of the posters, meticulous details of the dates and locations. I tried to be as thorough as possible, knowing this might be my sole opportunity to capture this horrifying truth. As I was photographing a section of wall near the front door, something peculiar caught my eye. One of the posters seemed to be concealing something, its edge peeling back slightly, revealing what appeared to be faint writing underneath. Against every fiber of my better judgment, driven by an insatiable, terrifying need for answers, I reached out and carefully peeled back the poster. Scratched crudely into the raw wood underneath were words. As I read them, a cold dread washed over me, draining the color from my face, turning my blood to ice. "They know you're here." A faint sound from outside made me jump. A sudden, sharp jolt of terror. It was barely audible, but utterly unmistakable. The distinct snap of a twig underfoot. I didn't hesitate for a second. I bolted for the door, bursting out onto the porch and down the rickety steps into the cool night air. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I risked a fleeting glance back at the cabin. There, silhouetted in the darkened doorway, stood a figure. The fading light cast their face in impenetrable shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me, a palpable weight of unseen observation. They raised a hand, a slow, deliberate gesture, almost as if they were waving goodbye. I ran. I ran like I had never run before, a desperate, frantic blur, crashing blindly through the undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs. My lungs burning with exertion and branches whipping relentlessly at my face. I had no idea if I was being pursued, and I didn't dare, not for a single second, look back to check. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like an eternity, hours stretching into an endless, terrifying nightmare. The forest had grown utterly dark, the ancient trees looming overhead like silent, judgmental sentinels. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a fresh jolt of paralyzing terror through me. Finally, mercifully, I saw lights ahead, the parking lot where I'd left my car. Shimmering like a mirage, a fragile beacon of safety in the oppressive, suffocating darkness of the forest. I scrambled into my car, my hands fumbling uncontrollably with the keys, shaking so violently I could barely manage to get them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life with a triumphant cough, I caught a fleeting movement in my rearview mirror, a shape, darker than the surrounding night, emerging slowly from the tree line. I floored it, tires squealing in protest on the gravel as I peeled out of the parking lot, leaving a cloud of dust and fear in my wake. I didn't slow down, not until I hit the main highway, the distant lights of other cars and the faint, reassuring glow of the city never looking so welcoming, so utterly beautiful. I drove straight to the police station. The officer at the desk, a tired-looking man, appeared skeptical as I babbled out my unbelievable story, but when I thrust my phone at him, displaying the horrifying pictures, his expression underwent a dramatic, chilling transformation. He disappeared into a back room, returning a few minutes later with a grim-faced detective. I spent hours at the station, a blur of repeating my story, showing them the damning pictures, answering their relentless questions. They seemed particularly fixated on the poster of my coworker, Ben. When I mentioned that I'd seen him just days ago, the detective exchanged a fleeting, unreadable look with his partner. They assured me they would investigate, promising to send a team out to the cabin first thing in the morning. They then gave me a stark, chilling piece of advice. For your own safety, they cautioned, do not talk about what you've seen to anyone. I went home that night, but sleep was an impossible luxury. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those haunting faces on the posters, their eyes seeming to follow me, accusing. I kept replaying the terrifying events in my mind, second-guessing every single decision I had made. Should I have fled sooner? Should I have never even ventured into that cabin at all? The next morning, the phone rang. It was the detective. They had sent a team out to the exact location I had given them, he explained, but they hadn't found anything. No cabin, no posters, not even a clearing that matched my detailed description. I protested, insisted that I could personally take them there, lead them directly to it. But when we arrived at the trailhead, nothing looked familiar. The path I distinctly remembered taking was nowhere to be found. It was as if the entire horrifying experience had been nothing more than a vivid, terrifying dream, a hallucination. But I knew what I had seen. The pictures on my phone proved it, even if the police seemed hesitant, even reluctant to accept them as concrete evidence. They suggested the images could have been doctored, fabricated. Without the physical evidence of the cabin and the posters, they asserted there was little more they could do. My coworker, Ben, never returned to work. The official story, a flimsy veil over a terrifying truth, was that he had suddenly quit, moved out of state for a new job opportunity. But I knew the horrifying truth. His smiling face was seared into my memory, eternally smiling out from that missing person poster. I've spent countless hours since then, a relentless, desperate search, researching the names and faces from the other posters I saw. Some of them I've managed to find information about, cold cases, mostly people who had vanished without a trace over the years. But many of them, a chillingly large number, don't seem to exist in any official records at all. It's as if they've been utterly erased. Their disappearances as forgotten as that phantom cabin in the woods. I don't go hiking anymore. I've moved to a new apartment in a bustling, vibrant part of the city, surrounded by the constant, comforting hum of traffic and the reassuring presence of countless other people. But even here, in the heart of urban life, I can't shake the insidious feeling of being watched. Sometimes, late at night, when the city's hum is dulled, I think I see a familiar shape in the shadows outside my window, a figure darker than the surrounding night, watching and waiting, and I wonder, with a cold dread, how long it will be before I become just another face on a poster, another forgotten mystery in that horrifying cabin of lost souls. Story 14. The sharp creak of the floorboard echoed through the silent cabin, a sound that ripped through the stillness and sent an immediate bolt of ice through my veins. I was supposed to be utterly alone out here, miles from the nearest whisper of civilization, nestled deep in the untamed wilderness. But that sound, it wasn't the gentle settling of old wood, or the mournful song of the wind whistling through unseen cracks. No, that was the unmistakable, terrifying sound of a footstep, and it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. I'd rented this remote cabin for a blessed week, desperate for a profound dose of solitude after months of relentless, soul-crushing work. The listing, with its enticing promises, had boasted of extreme seclusion, and it had certainly delivered. The narrow, treacherous dirt road leading here had been almost impassable in my city car, winding relentlessly through dense, Claustrophobic forest for miles before finally, dramatically, opening up to reveal a picturesque log cabin nestled serenely against a backdrop of towering, ancient pines. The first couple of days had been pure, unadulterated bliss. I'd explored the surrounding trails, feeling the earth beneath my feet, lost myself in the pages of books by the crackling fireplace, and luxuriated in the kind of profound silence you can only truly discover when you are utterly alone in the heart of nature. No cell service, no intrusive Wi-Fi, not even the comforting hum of a landline, just me enveloped by the untamed wilderness. But on the third night, an insidious shift occurred. Things changed. It began with subtle, almost imperceptible anomalies. A kitchen chair I could have sworn I'd meticulously tucked beneath the table was inexplicably pulled out when I returned from a hike. A book I'd left casually on the coffee table was suddenly, impossibly relocated to a shelf. These discrepancies were minute enough that I could almost convince myself I was imagining things. That the profound isolation was playing cruel tricks on my weary mind. Then came the noises. Soft at first, easily dismissed as the natural nocturnal sounds of the forest settling into its slumber. But they grew progressively bolder, more distinct, more insistent. The sharp snap of a twig just outside my window as I was drifting into a fragile sleep. The soft shuffle of unseen feet on the porch in the dead, suffocating silence of night. Each time I forced myself to muster the courage to investigate. My heart hammering a frantic rhythm as I peered out into the impenetrable darkness. And each time, I'd see nothing but the silent, indifferent forest staring back at me. I vehemently told myself I was being paranoid, that the overwhelming quiet and profound isolation were simply making me jumpy, causing me to overanalyze every tiny sound. But deep down, a primal, ancient part of me knew better. It knew with a bone-deep certainty that we, as humans, were not meant to be alone in the dark. It whispered that our distant ancestors huddled together in caves for a reason. It insinuated that something was out there, watching, waiting. And now, lying paralyzed in bed on this fourth night, that once subtle whisper had become a deafening scream, because that footstep outside my door, that was undeniably real. As real as the icy, paralyzing fear gripping my heart. As real as the cold sweat beating on my forehead. I held my breath, straining every nerve, every fiber of my being for any further sound. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Only the thunderous pounding of my own heartbeat, a frantic drum in my ears, and the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of wind through the pine needles outside. Then another creak. Closer this time. My eyes darted wildly around the room, desperately searching for anything at all I could use as a weapon. They landed almost providentially on the heavy metal flashlight resting on the nightstand. I reached for it slowly, meticulously, trying not to make a single sound as my trembling fingers closed around its cold, unyielding surface. The door handle began to turn, achingly, impossibly slow. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white with the sheer effort of remaining utterly still, of not screaming, of not bolting, of not doing any of the 100 panicked things my terror-stricken brain was screaming at me to do. The door swung inward. In the dim, ethereal moonlight filtering through the curtains, I could discern a silhouette, tall, broader than any human ought to be, with a shape that seemed fundamentally wrong somehow, not quite proportioned like a person should be. For a frozen heartbeat, we both remained motionless, me, utterly paralyzed with fear on the bed, the grotesque figure a looming, terrifying presence in the doorway, its head cocked slightly, as if meticulously studying me. Then it moved. I didn't think. I reacted. A guttural yell ripped from my throat, a sound that was equal parts raw terror and desperate defiance. I hurled the heavy flashlight at the intruder. It connected with a sickening, dull thud, and the figure stumbled backward, emitting a grunt that was disturbingly, profoundly inhuman. I didn't wait to witness the outcome. I leapt from the bed, adrenaline coursing like liquid fire through my veins, and barreled past the momentarily stunned intruder. I caught a fleeting glimpse of matted fur, of eyes reflecting an eerie, unnatural green in the moonlight, but my mind, in its desperate self-preservation, refused to fully process the horrifying image. I ran through the cabin, a blind, desperate flight, not daring to glance back. The front door was locked. Had I done that? No time to remember, no time for anything but escape. I fumbled frantically with the deadbolt, my sweaty hands slipping uselessly on the cool metal. Behind me, I could hear heavy, lumbering footsteps, a low, guttural growl that raised the hair on the back of my neck. The lock finally gave way with a metallic click, and I burst out onto the porch, the cool night air hitting me like a physical slap to the face. I leapt off the steps, my bare feet slamming into the damp earth, and I ran. I had no plan, no destination etched in my mind, only the desperate, consuming need to escape, to put as much distance as humanly possible between myself and whatever unspeakable horror lurked within that cabin. The forest was a dark, blurring chaos around me, branches whipping painfully at my face and arms as I crashed blindly through the underbrush. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been mere minutes, or it could have stretched into an eternity of hours. Time had utterly lost all meaning in the primal, all-consuming fear that drove me relentlessly forward. My lungs burned, a raw, excruciating agony. My legs ached with a deep, protesting fatigue, but still, I pushed on, driven by an instinct far older than reason. Finally, my body, pushed beyond its absolute limits, could go no further. I collapsed against the rough bark of a tree, gulping in great, ragged lungfuls of air as my initial, overwhelming panic slowly, mercifully began to subside. As my mind slowly returned to clarity, I began to take desperate stock of my dire situation. I was utterly alone in the vast, unforgiving woods in the dead of night, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. I had no shoes, no phone, no remote idea which direction the terrifying cabin lay. And something I couldn't even begin to comprehend, something that defied all logic and reason, was out here with me. A twig snapped, a sharp, distinct sound in the impenetrable darkness behind me. I whirled around, pressing my back instinctively against the rough, reassuring bark of the tree, my muscles tensed, ready for whatever horror might emerge. My eyes strained against the oppressive gloom, desperately searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the unseen threat. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, an unnatural, chilling silence settling over everything. Then I saw them, eyes glowing faintly in the suffocating darkness. Not just one pair, but several, surrounding me, a silent, predatory circle closing in on all sides. They blinked slowly, methodically, like apex predators meticulously sizing up their prey. A low, resonant growl rumbled through the night, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I felt it deep in my chest, a primal, ancient sound that spoke of unbridled hunger and ruthless violence. This was it, I thought, with a grim, resigned certainty. This is how I die. Alone in the unforgiving woods, torn apart by what? My mind still struggled, fought against accepting what I'd glimpsed in the cabin, what I was seeing now, illuminated by those terrifying eyes. But as the eyes drew closer, as dark, indistinct shapes began to materialize from the deeper shadows, a strange, profound calm settled over me. The raw, visceral fear was still present, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was muted now, overshadowed by a grim, almost serene acceptance. If this was truly my end, I would face it standing. I pushed off from the tree, standing as tall, as defiant as I possibly could. "What are you?" I called out, surprised by the unexpected steadiness in my voice. "What do you want from me?" For a long, unsettling moment, there was no response. Then, a voice spoke from the darkness. It was rough, guttural, as if human speech was an ill-fitting garment it wore with profound discomfort. "We are the forgotten," it rasped, the words scraping like stones. The ones who walked these woods long before your kind came. We are hunger. We are the night. And you are trespassing. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly as dry as desert dust. I didn't know, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The cabin. I rented it. I didn't mean to intrude. A harsh, rattling sound echoed through the ancient trees. It took me a moment too long, to realize it was laughter. Rented? The voice rasped, the word dripping with scorn, as if the very concept of this ancient land being owned, parceled out and sold, was an absurd, ludicrous joke. You humans, always thinking you can claim what isn't yours. The shapes were closer now. I could clearly make out shaggy, powerful forms, hunched and immensely strong. They moved with an unsettling, disturbing mixture of animal grace and almost human posture. What will you do with me? I asked, hating the tremor that had, despite my efforts, crept back into my voice. There was a long pause, a silent deliberation, as if they were collectively considering my fate. Then, a chilling pronouncement. We should kill you, rend your flesh, crack your bones. It's been so long since we've tasted human meat. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself, waiting for the inevitable, brutal attack. But it didn't come. Instead, the voice continued, its tone strangely measured. But we are not mindless beasts. We remember the old ways, the rules of hospitality. You came in ignorance, not malice. So, we will grant you a choice. My eyes snapped open, a fragile flicker of hope rekindled. A choice? I whispered. Yes. You may leave these woods, never to return. Speak of what you've seen to no one. Live out your days with the memory of this night haunting your dreams. Or, I prompted when the voice, with dramatic effect, trailed off. Or, it continued, you may stay. Become one of us. Leave behind your human life with all its noise and confusion. Embrace the simplicity of the hunt, the purity of the wild. I stood there, utterly stunned, suspended between two terrifying realities. A part of me, a larger, more primal part than I cared to acknowledge, was undeniably tempted by the sheer audacity of the offer. To shed the suffocating complications of modern life, to run truly free in the boundless woods, unfettered by social expectations, unburdened by responsibilities. It was a seductive, almost irresistible thought in its raw, primal simplicity. But as I looked at the terrifying creatures surrounding me, as I truly contemplated the monstrous implications of such a profound transformation, I knew, with a certainty that reached into my soul, that I couldn't do it. I wasn't ready to relinquish my humanity, no matter how alluring the alternative might seem in this moment of paralyzing fear and surging adrenaline. I need to leave, I said finally, my voice a little shaky. I'm sorry for intruding on your territory. I promise I'll never come back. I won't tell anyone what I've seen here. A low murmur, a collective, almost indistinguishable sound passed through the gathered creatures. Finally, the one who had been speaking stepped forward. In the faint, ethereal moonlight filtering through the dense canopy above, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was like something torn from the deepest recesses of a nightmare, part wolf, part bear. Part man, yet wholly its own terrifying, unique entity. So be it growled, its voice still rough, guttural. But know this, human. The wild places of the world are shrinking. One day there will be nowhere left for us to hide. When that day comes, we will remember those who respected our boundaries, and those who did not. With that chilling pronouncement, the creature turned and loped silently off into the deeper darkness. One by one, the others followed, melting seamlessly into the encroaching shadows until I was utterly alone once more. I sank to my knees, the last vestiges of adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving me shaky, weak, and profoundly exhausted. As the first faint light of dawn began to creep tentatively through the dense trees, I found my way, as if by instinct, back to the cabin. I packed my belongings in a daze, a disoriented stupor, then drove down that winding, treacherous dirt road, not stopping, not even once, until I was safely back in the familiar, comforting confines of the bustling city. I've kept my promise. I've never uttered a single word to anyone about what truly transpired that night. But sometimes when the city feels too cramped, too noisy, too overwhelmingly human, I find myself gazing towards the distant mountains, their peaks a silent, ancient promise. And for a brief, unsettling moment, I wonder what might have been if I'd made a different choice in those dark, whispering woods.